pinto beans ladled over a square of cornbread wrapped in newspaper tucked inside a coat pocket. That lunch kept coal miners standing through a 10-hour shift, and it cost less than a dime. One of these lunches is nothing but a cold, sweet potato and a pinch of salt, carried in a tin pail to a cotton field before the sun came up. Another is the sandwich a whole generation of Southern kids brought to school every single day, made from nothing but mayonnaise and white bread. And one is a lunch so plain that the woman who packed it never once sat down long enough to eat it herself. Nobody wrote these down because nobody needed to. Every morning, the same question got answered in every small kitchen in this country. What do we have, and how far will it stretch? 100 forgotten lunches your grandparents packed to survive. Number 25. Tomato soup with a grilled cheese triangle. The soup came from a number 10 can of Campbell's condensed, thinned with whole milk in a steam kettle the size of a kitchen sink. The cheese was a half slice of American on white bread, grilled in butter on a flat top until your bread shattered when you bit into it. Lunch ladies cut every sandwich on the diagonal, because the triangle dipped cleaner than the square. The ladle held 4 ounces, served into a 5-ounce bowl with a paper napkin folded under it. You dipped one corner, then another, and learned the order by 2nd grade. Today, the same lunch would fail 4 federal rules at once. Whole milk in the soup, white bread, butter on the griddle, and canned sodium together push past 740 milligrams. And whole grain bread now carries the sandwich. The original belongs to memory. Sardines on toast carried an honest simplicity that seniors living alone appreciated for both nutrition and economy. A small tin of sardines, often purchased for less than 20 cents, provided complete protein and enough substance for a satisfying midday meal. The preparation required nothing more than opening the can, arranging the fish on buttered toast, and adding perhaps a squeeze of lemon juice. The sardines came packed in oil, tomato sauce, or mustard, each variety offering different flavor profiles for minimal cost. Many seniors kept tins stacked in their pantries, knowing this lunch could be assembled in under 5 minutes without heating anything beyond the toast. The fish's salty richness paired perfectly with soft white bread, creating a combination that filled the stomach without elaborate cooking. For those watching pennies stretch across fixed incomes, sardines represented remarkable value. This humble lunch reminded many of simpler times when canned fish was considered perfectly respectable fare. Cold biscuit sandwiches with molasses or fatback were the kind of lunch that got a man through a 12-hour day with nothing but grit and habit to lean on. The biscuits were always cold by the time the tin lunch pail opened, but that did not matter much. If there was molasses in the pantry, you spread it thick for sweetness. If there was only fatback, you tucked in a slice or two for salt and smoke. The biscuits themselves were usually baked from leftover dough at dawn, made tough enough to hold together through a morning in a jacket pocket. By noon, the edges had gone soft, and the smell of lard or syrup made the whole meal feel like home. These sandwiches were a bridge between the breakfast table and the next hard stretch of fieldwork, something made from what little you had but worth every bite. Each one carried a taste of someone's kitchen, and even in its plainness, it was love in its simplest form, wrapped in wax paper and patience. Creamed corn and egg skillet was one of those weirdly satisfying lunches that showed up when the fridge was nearly empty and time was running short. You would grab a can of creamed corn, crack in a few eggs, and fry everything together in one pan. It sounds questionable now, but for families back then, it was warm, savory, and fast. Ready in minutes when kids came home hungry or dad's lunch break was short. It usually got served with plain white toast or leftover biscuits, soaking up every last bit of that creamy, buttery mess. Some folks added black pepper or a sprinkle of shredded cheese, but most kept it plain because that is what was in the cupboard. It was not glamorous, and nobody was putting this on a restaurant menu, but in old cookbooks it was listed right next to the hearty quick meals section. That is how you knew it worked. Homemade fish sticks were a really easy dish to make at home. They were really popular in blue-collar households and rural farmsteads that either couldn't afford the back and forth to big cities to get hauls of frozen food, or just ones who preferred to make their own stuff. Even if the transport wasn't an issue, Frozen food would outright just be more expensive than people could accept sometimes, especially things like Gorton's or Van de Kamp's. Families didn't really just write the idea off entirely though, because the concept of fish sticks being frozen for later use is pretty good. They adapted it into a homemade recipe instead, and this was especially true for all the towns near coastal areas like in the Great Lakes. They had access to all kinds of fresh local fish. But what about the people who had lived their whole lives in landlocked areas with no sight of water? Well, they used canned or frozen fish, and they used it more sparingly than others, but they would still resort to making their own fish sticks at home. Buying entire fillets and cutting them up was a lot more cost-effective than buying the prepackaged thing. Also, if you were a Catholic and meatless Fridays were really a thing back in your home, this was a great alternative. It came in a little metal tin with a key you had to crank open like a can of paint, and inside was a pinkish meat paste that somehow became the crown jewel of school lunches across the country. Deviled ham sandwiches on Wonder Bread were the kind of thing your mom would pack with the same confidence as someone handing you a gold bar. It was salty, it was tangy, and it had that uncanny ability to smell up the entire lunchroom in 5 seconds flat. There was no middle ground. You either prayed for a trade or guarded it like it was national treasure. And let us not forget the bread. Wonder Bread, so white and soft it almost melted when you touched it. It was less of a sandwich and more of an edible napkin wrapped around a meat mystery. Kids today could not even imagine something like this being edible, let alone desirable. But back then, it was what you looked forward to after recess. It was what reminded you that even if you forgot your homework, at least your lunch was unforgettable. Somehow, deviled ham became a status symbol for a very specific kind of childhood chaos. We're going to start our list off with a plowman's lunch, which is actually a dish best served cold. This little work of art features a lot of sharp cheddar cheese, which definitely makes it a hit with fans of dairy. The next thing that makes a plowman's lunch so zesty and flavorful is pickled onions and a good layer of Branston pickles for safe measuring. Now all you need is some crusty bread and some hard-boiled eggs, and you pretty much have lunch served. It was more common for people to take things like cold cuts of meat, pork pies, or an apple slice for some variety in the food, but eggs were the one thing you would see non-stop with this dish. It's a pretty well-balanced blend of different flavors. You have a nice little vinegary tang from the pickles, but it doesn't get overwhelming thanks to the cheese helping to cut through all that. Eventually, the cheese mixes really well with the bread, and after it sets and coats the pickles in there, you get an incredibly delicious meal. This was a meal right out of the 50s and 60s, and funnily enough, this was something that was marketed by the Cheese Bureau in Britain so that cheese sales could go up a lot. And so the thing back then with lunch was that you really wanted it to be portable. You didn't have a little deli on the corner with a killer quesadilla or Uber Eats back then. Dishes were often made with energy and transportability in mind. One of the most popular things that people would ever eat back in the day was bread with meat drippings. Despite what you might think, this is really just stale bread with leftover drippings that were squeezed out. People weren't fond of letting the drippings go to waste back then. They could be used as a cooking fat, as a dip, or as a coating to increase flavor. Poor people would generally try their best to keep a steady supply of them. This was also one of the most popular meals to come out of the Great Depression because of how economical it was. It also luckily worked better with bran and rye bread instead of the fluffy, white wheat flour one we're used to. That meant that the dish was able to hit a bigger audience because a lot of people were barred from ever being able to buy fluffy white flour-based bread. These were okay, really. Just an average breakfast to get you started, but they were wonderful at stretching out the pantry and making sure things stay for as long as possible. Also, if there's ever something you need toast for, but you're just out of butter, syrup, or whatever, a name you might not hear very often in the cooking world, as far as French cuisine is concerned at least, is Marie-Antoine Carême, but you can thank her for some amazing dishes such as the vol au vent. This is actually something that got so popularized in American cookbooks in the mid-20th century. In the 1970s, when a national interest in foreign cooking really started popping off in America, there were a lot of trends centered around haute cuisine, and especially things you would find in premium French restaurants. In French-American communities, a vol au vent was a typical Saturday lunch that you would find being served up by your grandmother. Marie-Antoine Carême is a legendary French chef, and a reason she got that acclaim was because she managed to make up dishes that would suit the average household. Vol au vent is actually not really something you'd find at a five-star restaurant or on the upper end of what your wallet could afford. Most people would treat this like a party meal, something to serve at cocktail parties or New Year's ones. It was just puff pastry filled in with chicken, mushrooms, and creamy sauces, but it blended all of those together to make a really warm and earthy taste, which makes it perfectly suited to something you'd associate with your grandma's table. One thing that helped a lot throughout arguably all of the Dust Bowl was the simple luxury known as cornbread. Cornbread was made entirely out of cornmeal, and that was one of the things that was still abundant throughout America. Here, you can run out of walkers in busy hospitals, but never corn. Funny how that one works, right? Anyway, the Dust Bowl was something that almost entirely hit rural areas throughout the Great Plains. You had places like Kansas, Kentucky, Colorado, Orlando, Texas, and so many more areas hit badly by the horrible circumstances that led to the bowl. How was your average schmuck supposed to stay happy and keep his family fed? Well, cornbread and beans were the peasant folks' answer to nature throwing a temper tantrum. Now, it was obvious that the only way they were going to be helped was if they did it themselves, so lots of people began trying to cultivate crops of corn. Beans, particularly pinto and navy beans, were still relatively affordable, even in the face of the Depression. Seriously, I can't talk about how horrible that entire decade was for America. It was like a series of unfortunate events, each even worse for the economy than the last. People held on to things like cornbread and beans like they were pearls. One of the most popular types of bourbon whiskey was cherry bourbon, and one of the best ideas people ever had was mixing that with chicken wings to get a cherry bourbon edition of the best side dish ever known to man. The taste is impeccable. The bourbon enhances every single thing about the chicken wings, while adding a new flavor from the cherry aspect. It kind of gives it this sweet aftertaste that's not really overbearing. You know, some of the best additions and flavors to a tried and tested classic are ones that don't overstay their welcome. They don't overwhelm what you already love about the dish, they just take it a step further with the addition of something new. That's why this dish got so popular at cookouts and pot roasts and was a given if your family was having a pizza night. African American families in particular would love a big combo of chicken wings doused in cherry bourbon, because no party really felt complete without them. You might think I'm over-exaggerating because what can whiskey really do? Well, once you bake these wings to crispy perfection and then add them in a cherry bourbon BBQ sauce, you'll know just how good they are for yourself. Give it a try because it's probably the easiest recipe on this list so far. From the heart of Alabama come the fried chicken and biscuits that hold a significant place in soul food restaurants. Battered chicken, deep-fried in oil to achieve a perfect golden brown crust paired with fluffy biscuits, were the new favorite dish across Alabama in the 1970s. From roadside cafes to diners across the state, chefs put this dish on the menu for an affordable price in the 70s. Introduced in the heyday of frozen TV dinners, chicken pot pie rose to fame in the 1950s when pre-made lunches were the new trend. Chicken pot pie was advertised as a convenient lunch that could feed a whole family without any culinary effort. It definitely helped that the pie was a marvel, taste-wise. Think of a flaky pastry crust filled with chicken, vegetables, and creamy sauce. If your mouth is watering right now, just imagine how attracted families were by this pre-made lunch. Chicken pot pie was a lunch classic in households by the late 1950s, with almost every house having it as lunch at least once a week. Alas, as most processed frozen foods have downfalls, chicken pot pie also lost its footing in the pre-made market. Items like Lunchables and frozen fried foods gained more traction through TV advertisements, and chicken pot pie was replaced on the lunch table. Here we go! Pizza first appeared in American school cafeterias in the late 1950s, tailor-made to appeal to children with rich, savory toppings such as pepperoni and sausage. Originally from Italy, this beloved dish was transformed in the U.S. with hearty, high-fat ingredients, providing a quick and satisfying student meal. Assembled with hand-stretched dough, slathered with tomato sauce, and layered with mozzarella and meats, the pizza is baked at high temperatures. This process melds the flavors and textures into a delicious offering with a crispy crust and a melted cheese topping. The combination of carbohydrates, protein, and fats met the nutritional needs of busy school environments efficiently, making pizza a consistent hit among students who relished the comforting taste and filling nature of each slice. Number 24. Fish sticks with tartar sauce. They came frozen in a wax-lined case of 200, breaded, golden, and rectangular, baked on a sheet pan for 15 minutes at 400 degrees. Friday was fish day in most American school districts because the Catholic kids needed the option, and once your kitchen was set up for them, the rule stayed for everyone. The tartar sauce was a paper cup of mayonnaise and pickle relish from the lunch lady's own bowl. 3 sticks per tray, a scoop of mac and cheese on the side, a square of cornbread. Kids who grew up watching Friday fish trays slide down the line still smell the lemon wedges when they pass a freezer aisle. The fish came from Atlantic pollock fillets caught off Massachusetts. By 2014, the breading carried too much sodium for elementary trays. The recipe simply walked off the menu. Cottage cheese and canned peaches became a lunchtime staple for seniors seeking something cool, refreshing, and requiring absolutely no cooking. This combination appeared on countless plates during the 1950s and 1960s when cottage cheese was promoted for its protein content and digestibility. A scoop of creamy cottage cheese surrounded by golden peach halves created a meal that felt lighter than sandwiches but remained filling enough to sustain energy through the afternoon. The sweetness of the syrup-packed peaches balanced the mild tang of the cheese, creating flavors that complemented rather than competed. For seniors living alone, this lunch offered particular advantages, since both components kept well in the refrigerator and required no preparation beyond spooning onto a plate. A small container of cottage cheese and a single can of peaches could provide lunches for several days, stretching grocery budgets admirably. Though rarely seen on modern plates, this pairing once represented sensible, economical eating for one. Cornbread and buttermilk in a jar was one of those hill country meals that told you everything about the people who made it. It was called a liquid lunch, though there was nothing fancy or store-bought about it. Crumbled cornbread went into a glass jar, and then cold buttermilk was poured over it until it soaked every crumb. On hot days, that jar came straight from a spring house or well bucket, cool enough to wake a man right up. You would shake it, maybe add a pinch of salt, and drink it thick like a meal. It was cheap, simple, and almost impossible to ruin, which is exactly why it became a favorite among farmers, mill hands, and anyone working under the sun. Some swore it was better than anything cooked fresh because it filled your belly without slowing your body down. It might not look like much, but that mixture of tangy milk and gritty bread was the South's version of endurance, comfort disguised as thrift. Pimiento cheese sandwiches on white bread were the Southern lunchbox staple that quietly made their way into kitchens across the country. You made up a big batch of pimiento cheese, usually shredded cheddar, mayo, and little diced pimiento peppers, then slapped it between slices of soft sandwich bread. That was lunch, fast and done. If you were lucky, the batch had been chilling in the fridge overnight so the flavors had time to settle. It showed up everywhere, from school cafeterias to Sunday church gatherings, and you did not need fancy ingredients to pull it together. The filling looked bright orange and odd to anyone who had never tried it, but it was creamy, sharp, and surprisingly satisfying. Some folks added extras like sliced pickles or lettuce, but the plain version stuck around because it was quick, cheap, and kept everyone fed when time was tight. Old cookbooks had pages of pimiento cheese variations, but the classic stayed the same: easy, portable, and just filling enough to get you through the day. Yes, you heard it here first, skunk stew. Even when the Dust Bowl left dinner plates empty, people were not the only ones who could not escape being eaten, not even skunks. Now, before you start gagging, let me explain. Skunks were not the preferred source of protein, but when the resources were scarce, the farmers made do with whatever they could hunt down. Cooking skunk stew was not for the faint-hearted. First, you had to, de-skunk the skunk. It was mandatory to have the scent glands removed unless one wanted the house cleared faster than a tornado. After washing, it was cooked with what vegetables and spices were available. The result? A rather soft and gamey meal that was palatable though, but not one that would make me eagerly look forward to the next meal. Skunks may sound like the butt of some jokes, but these animals were a good source of protein food when all else was scarce. And can you imagine? A skunk was not as smelly as other wild games like raccoon or possum. Talk about a backhanded compliment. While skunk stew appears to be the epitome of the challenge-accepted food that is popular today for the survivors of the Dust Bowl, it was a symbol of survival. They made desperation into dinner. As they say, where there is life, there is a chance to live, and sometimes to live, you have to eat the wild, literally. Hot dog pie was what happened when dinner and lunch collided in the middle of a very questionable casserole dish. It was part mystery, part meat, and all nostalgia. Imagine cutting into a pie crust expecting apples and finding chopped up hot dogs swimming in a sea of onion, ketchup, and maybe a few rogue vegetables. It should have been horrifying, but to kids in the 1970s, it was a warm hug from a world that did not know what cholesterol was. Moms made it when they had too many leftovers and no energy. Dads ate it like it was steak. And kids? Kids bragged about having it cold in their lunchboxes the next day. It was savory, sloppy, and full of heart. Not culinary heart, just the metaphorical kind. Every forkful was a gamble. Would you hit more meat or more mush? Did it matter? Probably not. All that mattered was that it felt homemade. It felt like someone tried. Even if that someone was making dinner out of the last 5 hot dogs, a can of cream of mushroom soup, and a dream. Today, it sounds like a fever dream. Back then, it was a Tuesday. And that's why stuff like meat hand pies got as popular as they did. Not only were they really easy to stuff in your bag and walk around, but they were resistant to getting spoiled, so they could stay in there for quite a while if you got your break late, no worries. As far as the taste went, it goes down just like any meat pie, though most people were fond of using different cuts of pork and ground beef. A historical act about these is that during the 19th century, they were pretty much the ideal lunch for Cornish tin miners. The reason was that since mine workers usually had dirty hands, they would grip the pie by the edge of the crust and eat the rest, throwing away the part that got dirty. They got popular because of how satisfying the flavor is, though. It's rich and meaty, and that buttery crust with a peppery seasoning only helps to elevate this humble pie into a proper midday lunch. This is a pretty okay alternative. Another thing that people relied on rather frequently was cornmeal mush. I can't begin to tell you how much people loved cornmeal. From peasants to farmers to Native Americans and everybody in between the West and East, cornmeal was something that had really spread. It was like that one food of the nation that everyone just knew. Corn is one of the few things that grows as easily as it does in the United States, and it means that the potential for mass use is so strong. Cornmeal mush might not do well by today's standards because it's a rustic, simple dish, but back then this mush was enough to make your morning a bit more optimistically. When a lot of people had nothing else to eat, they would often turn to cornmeal. When people had no way of stretching their pantries until the next salary, there was little to go for. Corn was one of the few things people could make in 100 different ways, and it was virtually free or literally free if you had your own farming grounds. Speedies are also something you would find at gatherings for family or just friends, mostly because no party is complete without a good platter of meat skewers going around a few drinks. So, mostly people would enjoy these most when the meat was lamb, but some areas like California would use chicken or beef too. It was really the grilling where the magic happened. These plates of Speedies set the mood in a party alight. It was a taste that, when they experienced it, people at a party knew that they were in for a really good time. The kind of dish that gets a crowd excited and hungry. There were even Speedafests in Binghamton and all around New York in general. It was a part of the local culture that no big celebration was really complete without. The reason it got popular wasn't just because of a regional preference in New York, though. The dish was bold, tangy, and citrusy, and it could double as an amazing sandwich, too. You would find these in street stalls throughout New York, as well as at homes, but nowadays the dish has faded away into irrelevance. So, if corn was sitting pretty at number 1 in terms of what was easy to get, what would you say number 2 was? Well, historians would pretty much agree with potatoes being the popular choice. Particularly, having potatoes with onion soup and bread was another way for people to tick off 3 things from their daily routines: nutrition, a full meal, and enough food to go around the entire table. Potatoes were pretty much just 5 cents per pound, and this was right around the earliest years. The reason you wanted to keep a massive stock of these bad boys was because they were built for survival situations. They last like literally forever. I mean, I think I've had a few potatoes that have been around since the Prohibition. Secondly, their other name is versatility. Fry it, boil it, steam it, mash it, or dice it. Whatever way you repurpose a potato, you'll get a damned good meal out of it. Plus, the fact that they're full of carbs makes them one of the best things to eat during a drought because it keeps your appetite low. Bread and onions were pretty much priced around the same price point, and that meant that people were able to make a good soup out of the 3 pretty easily. Now let's be real. People were definitely lowballing their standards just to be able to enjoy the meal, especially after like the 56th time they had it, but it was still a lot easier to swallow than other alternatives. Fisherman's stew was something that got popular because of necessity. Back then, fishermen used to be out at sea for so long that they'd often go days or sometimes even weeks without seeing home or their families. It was the cons of the job, you know? What were you going to do? Sit at home and hang your net, giving it all up because you haven't had enough time to unwind? One thing that hasn't changed about America ever is that the grind never really stops, so that certainly wasn't an option. What was an option was making the best use of whatever the catch of the day was. Sometimes you'd get shellfish or crawfish. Sometimes you'd get proper sea bass or red mullets and monkfish. If you kept some basic vegetables and seasoning with you, like red pepper, onions, cayenne, and salt, then you could still make a pretty serviceable stew. This is kind of why the term fisherman's stew is a bit of an umbrella phrase. Depending on where you are in the country or what kind of time period you're talking about, it can really mean 20 different things. Just mixing up the spices creates an entirely new dish, so imagine what it was like changing up the main star, the fish, almost every day. They were creating new stews on a daily basis without even knowing it. It caught on so much and became such an acquired taste for your average fisherman that they began having it at home too, and from there on, you can probably put 2 and 2 together. You have one really versatile dish that can work with like 15 kinds of fish, almost every seasoning in your cabinet, and every vegetable in your pantry. Stews themselves are really affordable and feed whole families while keeping everyone's health up, so it's no wonder that so many grandmas and grandpas used to serve this as lunch. Alaska reindeer sausage was unlike any sausage America had ever seen. So it is no wonder that this grilled reindeer sausage that was served in a bun with sauerkraut became a go-to lunch for people. The lunch was especially served in summers when several vendors and restaurants started grilling a mix of beef, pork, and reindeer meat on a bun with sauerkraut. Macaroni and cheese with tuna emerged as another budget-friendly lunch that delivered a unique taste to people. Inspired by tuna noodle casseroles, this dish was a seafood take on the classic macaroni and cheese. All people had to do was buy cheap canned tuna from the market and combine it with homemade macaroni and cheese, and in a few minutes, you had a filling meal. Considering seafood prices were roaring during the early 1940s and 1950s, tuna macaroni and cheese was adopted by people as a favorable lunch alternative to seafood items restaurants were serving. Soon enough, lunch tables across the states were using canned tuna as the main protein that enhanced the taste of their macaroni and cheese. Eventually, the food started losing fans as fresh seafood became cheaper in the States due to increased production. This led to a negative impact on the sales of canned tuna, and so tuna macaroni and cheese vanished from family tables. Fried chicken patties were introduced to American schools in the 1980s and quickly became a favorite due to their similarity to popular fast food. These patties are made from ground chicken mixed with spices, then breaded with flour and breadcrumbs to create a crispy outer layer. The frying process transforms these prepared patties into golden, crunchy delights with a juicy interior, typically served as sandwiches or with sides like fries. The method of preparing these patties is well suited to the high-volume requirements of school cafeterias, involving simple steps that can be executed quickly: mixing, forming, breading, and frying. This efficiency ensures that delicious hot meals can be served promptly, reducing wait times and maximizing student satisfaction during lunch breaks. Creamed corn on toast transformed a humble canned vegetable into a warm, comforting lunch that could be ready in minutes. Seniors living alone during the 1950s and 1960s often kept cans of creamed corn stacked in pantries, knowing they could heat one on the stovetop and pour it directly over buttered toast for a filling midday meal. The cream-style corn needed no additional preparation, its thick texture clinging to the bread while the natural sweetness balanced the butter's richness. Some cooks added a dash of black pepper, but the dish required no elaborate seasoning to satisfy. For those on fixed incomes, creamed corn represented remarkable value at roughly 15 cents per can, enough to top 2 or 3 slices of toast. The combination provided both carbohydrates and vegetables, offering balanced nutrition without complicated cooking. This was practical food for practical people, requiring only a saucepan and 5 minutes of attention. Though largely forgotten today, creamed corn on toast once filled stomachs across America. Apple stack cake slices were the mountain answer to store-bought sweets, and they lasted long enough to pack for lunch. Layers of molasses cake were stacked with cooked-down dried apples that had been mashed into a thick jam. You wrapped it tight in wax paper, and by noon the cake had softened and the apple filling had settled deep into every layer. These slices were never fancy, but they were the closest thing to dessert most folks saw during a workday. They carried the taste of fall orchards and wood stoves even when eaten under the summer sun. If you were lucky enough to get one in your pail, it was probably made by a grandmother who measured sweetness by memory, not spoons. The sugar was scarce, the flour stretched thin, but the effort behind it was rich. It was a small comfort after long hours in the field or at the mill, reminding everyone that even in lean times, there was room for something kind and homemade. Hot dog and cheese roll-ups were the lazy day lunch every kid begged for, and every parent threw together when the cupboards looked bare. You flattened a slice of white bread, laid down a piece of cheese, rolled in a hot dog, and either microwaved it or crisped it up in a pan. It was fast, cheesy, and exactly what you needed when there were hungry mouths and barely any groceries. Some folks sliced them into little bites for parties or potlucks, but most families just ate them whole with a squirt of mustard or ketchup on the side. These roll-ups showed up in almost every old-school cookbook under quick meals or lunches for kids because they made one pack of hot dogs stretch a long way. You could make a whole tray of them in minutes, which is why this quirky little lunch became a go-to when time and money were both running low. It was not fancy, but it filled you up, and that is what counted. I know for a fact you've all grown up on some of your grandparents' baked ziti, especially if you have some Italian roots, and if you do, then you share that in common with this dish. Right from the streets of Italy, immigrants first brought this dish over in the middle of the 19th century throughout the early start of the 20th one, so it had a lot of time to become something that people could love and associate with the finer things in life. People had a lot of time by the mid-20th century to try this dish, and plenty of families had passed their own secret baked ziti recipes down. The baked ziti really hit its highest highs during that time period in the 1950s to the 1970s, and it was something you could enjoy at both a potluck and a fancy at-home date. It was a staple of Italian-American cooking, and you could even find it at weddings. I, for one, think that really speaks to how popular the dish was. But what's your experience with this dish? And if you don't have any yet, is it something you'd ever try out? Jell-O salad with shredded carrots was a betrayal that somehow got passed off as a side dish for decades. It looked like dessert and tasted like confusion. Your fork would go in expecting sweetness and come out with carrot bits clinging to neon green gelatin. No one knows who started it. Some say it came from the church potluck crowd. Others swear it was a prank gone too far. Either way, it ended up on cafeteria trays and family tables alike. You could not escape it. Lime Jell-O was the most common offender, but there were worse versions. orange, lemon, and the truly cursed cherry with celery. Moms called it a salad, so you would eat it. But there was no lettuce, no dressing, just the jiggling horror of a dessert that desperately wanted to be a vegetable. It was served with pride, too. People molded it into rings, decorated it with pineapple slices, and acted like it was gourmet. You had to pretend to like it, not out of politeness, but because the grown-ups genuinely thought it was good. It was one of the strangest culinary gaslights of the 20th century. And somehow, it stuck. A cold baked bean sandwich is what you think it is. It's just cold. 2 slices of modest bread, a familiar presence in the tomato-based sauce, with a generous spread of baked beans. The flavor is something that's a little bit sweet, a little bit tangy, but it's really just the textures that work here so well. The bread is chewy, but the beans mesh together as soon as you bite into them, and as the little bits of sauce squeezed out when you bite into the sandwich, it all makes for one flavorful bite. Cold baked bean sandwiches were a pretty common go-to lunch meal for people in the middle of the 20th century, especially in American households. This was even more true during the 40s, especially among blue-collar workers. Factory towns would often see people buying as much as canned beans as they could during grocery trips. People had a pretty practical approach to their food during these decades, and while the sandwich had no presentation or flair, it definitely got the job done. And it could do that for you today as well, because this is still as reliable of lunch now as it was back then, especially if you're pressed for time. Ketchup sandwiches are also in the same vein of, I don't really have anything else here. It's definitely some bare-bones cooking, but when you're down on your luck financially, it's not really the time to be picky. Ketchup sandwiches were usually made with brown bread because whatever white bread you could buy, you could also just get a lot more like potatoes, root vegetables, and onions instead. Those things could be made into soups and stews, so there were very few disadvantaged people actively relying on white bread. Ketchup was also fairly different in the 20th century than it is here. It felt more natural, it had a stronger tomato flavor, and it was a lot cheaper. A bottle of Heinz doesn't cost anything but a few cents. What people would do is sometimes take the meat drippings idea and mix it in with these ketchup sandwiches. They would spread the drippings on the bread or use it as a dip, and if nothing else, it definitely added some more interesting qualities to otherwise usually stale bread. How about you? Have you ever satisfied your hunger with nothing but ketchup and bread when times were rough? Personally, I think that just wouldn't begin to really fill me. I don't need to tell you about how much America and the West in general love rice pudding. It's been something that's helped rural and urban populations get through some disastrously tough times, as well as a warm memory from childhood for a lot of people. One variation of the classic rice pudding was a Swedish rice ring, which would mostly be served at Christmas or a family get-together, but it eventually extended into daily use too. The dish first started off as something you'd only find in Scandinavian communities, and they'd really make heaps of the stuff. Enough to go around a big family of 6 or 8 with a bowl for each, and it makes sense too since it was made using some pretty average ingredients. Stuff like rice, milk, and cream were all you needed to get a Swedish rice ring going. The way it differed from normal rice pudding is in how the dish was originally always made with some kind of spice and topped with fruit or served alongside jam. Later on, when it expanded past the Scandinavian locale and got adopted into widespread use, people started using nutmeg and cinnamon as well. Some scant cookbooks might still recall the dish and the times where it was a great comfort meal, but a lot of the new ones don't really remember it anymore. In pretty much exactly the same vein, you had brown bread and baked beans. Look, no matter how bad things get, you really can't change human nature. People need to switch things up, or before starvation and poverty take them, boredom and monotony will. One of the best ways to keep things fresh in the household was to just switch out the potatoes and onions for some baked beans. You had your typical beans, the same ones people were eating with cornbread, but they'd just be baked instead. This would give them a warm, toasty feeling, and you can definitely already guess how that came in clutch during wintertime. Oh yeah, winters during the Dust Bowl were a vivid scene out of hell. Those winds were sharp and cold enough to split your bones, but holding on to some sense of comfort thanks to your bowl of baked beans and bread, was a little joy that pushed people far enough into the new year and eventually the next season. Bourbon and chicken wings go together like birds and the sky, or like strawberry jam and bread. They've been one of the most definable aspects of American cooking and eating ever since they were first made in New Orleans, Louisiana, which got popular for its bourbon chicken. It used to be a subset of Cajun-themed cooking, but slowly, over time, its roots got diluted and it became more of a nationwide thing that everyone got into. Not much is known about the Arizona cheese crisp, besides the fact that cheese crisps are beloved appetizers served during lunchtime. A rather peculiar dish made out of an open-faced flour tortilla that is covered in shredded cheese was extremely popular amongst Mexican restaurants in Arizona. Moving on, we have the green bean casserole, which makes for a healthy lunch that was often served at holiday dinner. As the name suggests, this dish was a casserole made with green beans, cream of mushroom soup, and a hearty topping of crispy fried onions. Green bean casserole's recipe emerged from the Campbell Soup Company in 1955, which had long been producing canned cream of mushroom soups. They introduced the recipe as a way to increase sales of their newest soup, and this strategy was an instant success. Nearly 40% of their soups were sold to create the green bean casserole in both homes and restaurants. The dish remained a part of Thanksgiving lunches for a long while, before eventually households replaced it with a Thanksgiving casserole that had bits of everything we see on a Thanksgiving table. Boiled hot dogs have been a long-standing favorite in American school cafeterias, known for their simple, tasty, and quick preparation. Made from a blend of beef and pork, these hot dogs are seasoned and boiled, served in a soft bun with a variety of condiments like ketchup, mustard, and relish. This cooking method is particularly effective in school environments as it allows for hot dogs to be prepared en masse and kept warm. The simplicity of boiled hot dogs makes them a reliable choice for school cafeterias, where the lunch period is often brief and the demand for quick service is high. Additionally, the familiarity and ease of customization of hot dogs meet diverse student preferences, making them a popular and comforting choice. This meal option not only satisfies hunger swiftly, but also aligns with the logistical needs of serving hundreds of students. Number 23, Salisbury steak with brown gravy. The patty was beef and breadcrumb, shaped in a press and frozen flat, then baked from frozen for 40 minutes in a deep hotel pan. The gravy came from a sealed pouch of mushroom and onion base, mixed with hot water and stirred with a wooden paddle long enough to coat the back of a ladle. Cafeteria recipes from the 1988 USDA quantity cookbook called for 1 pound of meat to feed 5 kids, which made Salisbury steak the cheapest hot entree on the line. You either loved it or refused to eat it, and the lunch ladies could tell by 3rd grade which side of that line you were on. The patty went on mashed potatoes with green beans alongside, the gravy ladled across both. By the time the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act took effect in 2012, Salisbury steak carried more sodium than the new rules allowed. The wooden paddles went into storage. Hot tomato soup with saltines represented perhaps the most iconic simple lunch for seniors living alone, combining warmth, flavor, and affordability in a single bowl. Campbell's condensed soup cost roughly 12 cents per can and stretched to serve one generously when mixed with water or milk. The soup heated quickly on the stovetop, filling the kitchen with familiar aromas that signaled lunchtime. Saltine crackers floated on top or accompanied the bowl, their salty crunch providing textural contrast to the smooth, tangy soup. For those eating alone, this lunch offered psychological comfort alongside physical nourishment since the warm bowl felt like care and attention. The soup's smooth texture went down easily for those with dental concerns. A sleeve of crackers lasted weeks, making them economical pantry staples. This pairing sustained generations of seniors through quiet lunchtimes, requiring minimal effort. Though soup cans remain on shelves, the ritual of crackers floating in tomato soup has largely faded from daily practice. Unlike cheese crisps, the chicken and dumpling soup from Arkansas is a healthier and filling meal that was popularized in the 1970s. A soup created from cooking chicken in water and using the remaining broth to boil dumplings emerged as the new comfort food for people across Arkansas. pinto bean patties turned humble leftovers into something hearty enough to carry through a day's labor. When supper's beans cooled on the stove, the next morning they would be mashed, mixed with cornmeal or flour, and fried into small cakes. Crisp on the outside, soft inside, they held together just enough to slide between slices of bread for an easy sandwich. Cold or warm, it did not matter. They tasted like thrift and care, proof that nothing in a hillbilly kitchen ever went to waste. You could spice them if you had the means, but even plain, they had a comfort all their own. Some said the flavor deepened overnight, as if the beans remembered the smoke from last night's fire. These patties were food for people who understood how to make plenty out of scraps, and they did it with pride. A jar of pickles on the side turned it into a full meal, simple but whole, just like the folks who made it. Cottage cheese and canned peach plates were the no-cook lunch that showed up every time the stove was off limits or the heat outside was too much to bear. You scooped a mound of cottage cheese onto your plate, opened a can of peach halves, arranged them neatly, and called it lunch. Maybe you added a lettuce leaf underneath to make it look fancy, but nobody was fooling themselves. It was all about speed and simplicity. Diet cookbooks from the 1970s praised this plate as a light, protein-packed option that took barely 5 minutes to make. It was weirdly filling, cold, and refreshing, especially when summer kitchens felt like ovens. You could spot this combo everywhere, from lunch counters to school cafeterias, with old diner menus proudly listing it as the fruit and cottage cheese plate. It might not sound like much today, but back then, this quick plate was a lifesaver when groceries were tight and cooking felt like a chore. Cabbage and bacon fry-up was something people adored for its simplicity and its affordability. It was a hearty meal you would frequently see on dinner tables throughout the 1960s if you weren't already tired of seeing it everywhere in cookbooks. It was very common to see this in Appalachia and the South, because cabbage was especially cheap there. Bacon was something the entire nation had a deep-found appreciation for, but the South was always one step ahead in all things savory. The dish was supposed to be a main course meal with a side. This would usually be cornbread or potatoes, but if you were working with lower quantities, then this dish could also do great as a side dish. Cabbage was one of the most affordable vegetables on the entire market, and it was not seasonal. Back then, refrigeration had not become a countrywide phenomena that everyone could rely on 24/7 like we do. We have our fridges on all the time, you know? And cabbage was one of those kinds of vegetables that could last for weeks and weeks without any kind of refrigeration. It was really quick and easy, it was flexible, and you could even try all kinds of different spices and toppings like ranch dressing to make it even better. SpaghettiOs in a thermos were never hot. That was the unspoken truth everyone knew, but no one dared admit. They started hot, sure, bubbling on the stove in that cheerful red can. But by lunchtime, they were lukewarm at best, trapped in a metal container that always smelled slightly like old soup. And yet, those lukewarm pasta rings were magic. A swirling alphabet of childhood comfort, swirling in that iconic orange-red sauce. It was not Italian food, it was not even pasta really. It was SpaghettiOs, and that was enough. Kids would open their thermos with a dramatic twist, steam barely rising, and proudly take a spoonful like it was gourmet. Because it was not just about taste, it was about ritual, about having something warm in a sea of cold sandwiches, about having a lunch that made you feel like home followed you to school. You knew you would burn your tongue on the first bite and still go in anyway. It was worth it. Even when the sauce stained your shirt or your spoon got lost at the bottom of the thermos, you would do it again and again. Scotch eggs are actually a funny one. You would most commonly associate them with pub culture in Britain, right? I mean, that's how most people think of them. That's their history too. People would get off work or get a lunch break and decide to hit the local pub with the lads for a few Scotch eggs. What really are they, though? A Scotch egg is just an egg packed with protein. It's a hard-boiled or soft-boiled egg that gets this blanket of seasoned sausage meat, and nestled inside that, it gets coated in breadcrumbs, upon which it gets deep-fried until it's completely golden brown. So yeah, it's definitely one calorically dense egg, But that also makes it perfect for work because you can carry 2 or 3 of these and they fill you up right away. The crust is exactly as crispy as you're thinking it is, by the way. And I know you're getting ideas of how succulent this must be to bite into. Let me tell you, you're right on the money. The spiced pork on the inside is something divine, and the creamy egg center just brings everything together for the perfect flavor experience. The flavors also change depending on what spices you use and what herbs you pair it with, so you can really experiment a lot with this dish. So lard sandwiches were very similar to bread and meat drippings in the way they were used. Instead of being a standalone dip though, or a cooking fat used to toast the bread, these were instead coated with lard. The idea was to use it as a spread and basically just make a sandwich that way. What people would do to spice it up if they could is add scraps of meat if there were any, or some potatoes. They would mash them up, fry them lightly, and use the cutlets as a makeshift patty. It would actually work sometimes, but it was also a lot of work. The good thing about lard sandwiches was that they were ridiculously time efficient. It takes about 2 minutes maximum to make these, and then you have your lunch for work ready. Plus, it helps that people constantly feel rejuvenated thanks to the lard. It worked really well on those hard, labor-intensive days where you had nothing else to eat. It was also a fantastic option for long journeys because it was transportable, easy to carry, and high in energy and fat. However, it did spoil fast and easily, so it wasn't the most ideal solution for really long journeys. A good way to make it a bit better was to add root vegetables, mushrooms, and typical sandwich toppings to it, which I personally love doing. You hear the name rumaki and you might start thinking about some pretty exotic dishes, but it's actually more of a humble appetizer that picks a few flavors and does them really, really well. It was also made at Trader Vic's, a Polynesian-style restaurant right here in Uncle Sam's USA, which I'm sure you didn't see coming either. I wouldn't blame you for thinking it's exotic, since at tiki parties it was definitely considered that, and when tiki culture as a whole started erupting into the mainstream of American eating, it was still sought after, with just as much interest. The dish itself also makes use of some things that aren't familiar, and some that are, like chicken livers, water chestnuts, and bacon. It was a really good hors d'oeuvre that boomed in popularity after the World War II era, though you'd be pretty stumped if you tried to go out and look for it today. Still, it's kind of sad we can't go out to parties and experience chestnuts and crispy bacon anymore, wouldn't you agree? Or is tiki cooking not really up your alley? You already know what the deal is with potatoes. Besides just that, though, you might be surprised to know people really cozied up to cabbage. It only makes sense for cabbage and potato stew to be such a popular combination then. Why did this happen? How did it happen? Well, they just had chemistry, for lack of a better word. Cabbages were just as easy to grow as potatoes were, and they cost around the exact same, namely just 5 to 10 cents. You gotta understand one thing about living in times like this too. Nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, was eating for pleasure. People had 2 approaches to food during the entire Dust Bowl era. One was that you had to eat things that were filling because it would save costs. The other was that you had to eat things that would keep you healthy and free of sickness because it would save costs. By now, I think the entire national poverty aspect of all of this might really start to sink in. Either way, cabbage and potato stew was adept at satisfying both of those needs, so it only made sense that people made it such a regular meal at their tables. You used to only find a coq au vin blanc in French restaurants that really knew what they were doing. Top-of-the-line premium joints, the kind you'd maybe have to save up for. The black variation itself is a slow-cooked chicken stew, and this one is made with white wine instead of red wine. Some people that were familiar with the ins and outs of French cooking and had a good grasp of it would actually even make it at home. And I'm talking about before the slow cooker became everyone's best friend. They would really do the hours-long prep work just to get a taste of this, and it was worth it too. However, when the slow cooker did eventually come in, they let go of the ceramic pots, the cast iron Dutch ovens, and the hours spent waiting for it to simmer and absorb the flavors. This meant that you no longer had to go out just to a restaurant for a coq au vin blanc. You could just as easily prepare one overnight at home without even paying much attention to it. The braising process was easily imitated by any standard cooker. Naturally, that kind of accessibility means a huge rise in fans, and this dish had no shortage of them even outside of French-American households that focused a lot on eating traditional, rather than keeping up with the times and going for canned, processed food. Talking about budget lunches, the Cobb salad from California was a popular dish amongst people in search of a healthy salad. Cobb salad originated from the Brown Derby restaurant in Los Angeles after the chef realized he had not eaten in a while. Throwing together random ingredients, he created a salad that everyone would eat after a long day. Fast food gained a lot of popularity in America during the 1940s, so it is not surprising that chili cheese dogs are next on our list. Hot dogs topped with homemade chili and melted cheese were sold at just about every roadside cart to people looking for a quick lunch. Best for workers who had short breaks, chili cheese dogs were the perfect balance of spices and flavors that would satisfy their hunger. In fact, the common man took such a liking to these hot dogs that several variations of a chili cheese dog recipe was released to the public in cooking sections of the daily newspaper. Soon after, chili cheese dogs were a comfort lunch served at family tables, with each house adding whichever toppings they preferred. You will not see this food served during family lunches anymore because hot dogs today are reduced to their value as being a roadside food. Tater tots were born out of innovation in 1953 by the founders of Ore-Ida, Golden, and Francis Neefy Grigg. Utilizing leftover potato scraps from their French fry production, they created a new snack by chopping these remnants finely, mixing them with flour and seasonings, and forming them into small cylinders before deep frying them to a golden crisp. This process not only provided an efficient solution to food waste, but also produced a snack that was perfectly crispy on the outside while remaining fluffy inside. Tater tots are particularly popular as a side dish, but can also feature in recipes like casseroles, making them a versatile component of school lunches. The method of preparing tater tots involves deep frying, which, while requiring careful temperature control to achieve the perfect crunch without burning, fits well within the capabilities of large kitchen operations in schools. Number 22. Tater tots. They arrived in a 15-pound box from Ore-Ida, frozen into perfect cylinders the size of a child's thumb. The cafeteria oven held 6 sheet pans at once, 400 degrees for 20 minutes. No flipping required. A scoop and a half went on each tray, salted from a steel shaker the lunch lady refilled every morning before the bell. Tater tots were the side that made every other side acceptable. You would push the corn around the compartment and eat the tots first, then dip the Salisbury steak in ketchup and eat it second, then drink the milk last. The pattern was as fixed as the bell schedule. Modern cafeteria fryers have been removed from most American elementary schools under the saturated fat rules, but the tots survive in some districts only as baked oven varieties, drier and lighter. The crispness is gone. Bread and milk bowl was the simplest possible lunch, yet it sustained seniors across America when appetites were small or budgets impossibly tight. This wasn't a recipe so much as a survival strategy, combining torn pieces of bread with cold or warm milk in a bowl, sometimes sprinkled with sugar. The bread softened in the milk, creating something between cereal and soup that required no cooking and minimal chewing. During the 1940s through the 1960s, many elderly folks turned to this combination when other foods seemed too heavy to prepare. The meal provided calcium from the milk and carbohydrates from the bread, offering basic nutrition when appetites had diminished. Some variations used stale bread specifically, since soaking in milk revived even the driest crusts. The dish cost mere pennies, making it accessible even during the leanest weeks before pension checks arrived. Children who visited grandparents often remembered seeing this humble bowl. Bread and milk bowl remains a powerful symbol of resourceful simplicity. Cold-fried chicken thighs were not made for picnics or company. They were working man's food. The chicken was usually fried in lard the night before, seasoned simply with salt and pepper, then packed into tin pails while it was still warm. By the time lunchtime came, the crust had softened, the fat had settled, and the flavor had deepened into something only patience could make. Miners, loggers, and farm hands ate it straight from the bone, with biscuits or cornbread if they were lucky. It was greasy, hearty, and reliable, one of those meals that filled you up without fuss. Fried chicken was too precious to waste, so the thighs and legs went to work while the white meat stayed home for Sunday. Every bite carried the memory of the skillet's sizzle, the smell of home kitchens that kept the mountains fed even when the world forgot them. It seems eggs were pretty popular in the 70s, as Colorado's Denver omelet is next on our list. An omelet filled with diced ham, onions, bell peppers, and cheese was originally served on bread as a sandwich in Western America. Somewhat inspired by the egg foo young, the Denver omelet eventually developed into a breadless, only egg dish that was thoroughly enjoyed in Colorado as a lunch meal. Peanut butter and lettuce sandwiches were the strange little lunch you would not believe unless you grew up eating them. You grabbed a couple slices of soft sandwich bread, spread peanut butter on both sides, and tucked in crisp iceberg lettuce, because that is what most families had in the fridge. It sounds like a bad joke now, but it was crunchy, creamy, and surprisingly filling. That is why so many old cookbooks recommended it for kids' lunchboxes and quick snacks. Some adventurous folks added raisins or sliced bananas, but most stuck with plain lettuce and peanut butter when time was short and the pantry looked empty. It was quick, weird, and stretched every last bit of food when grocery runs were few and far between. You did not have to love it, but chances are if you were around back then, you definitely remember it. Forage mushrooms didn't always lining our burgers and topping our pizzas. For a majority of its history, it was really just something people ate when things were super bad. There was nothing to eat and people basically just had to forage for whatever they could. The most popular of this was the button mushroom, but they definitely tried to forage as much as they could. Now, despite this, mushrooms were still considered really low class. People had just begun to associate it with nothing but poverty and hard times. It wasn't until the middle and the later end of the 20th century that mushrooms started to become a classic topping you'd see on not just burgers and pizzas, but steaks, chicken dishes, sandwiches, and all kinds of soups and stews. Basically, it's a mushroom world, and we're just living in it now. A big part of this is how canned mushrooms became so accessible. Another reason is that an interest in European cuisine led to a massive boom in cream of soups and cream of mushroom soups. Share some of your favorite mushrooms with us right now in the comments. Potatoes weren't the only option. They were great, but not the only ones. On days when people would naturally get too tired of eating potatoes, they would always go for things like baked bean sandwiches. This was a filling, no-fuss meal that was especially loved by working-class homes that were doing labor-intensive work. They were very common in the Northeast, the Midwest, and different parts of the South, especially where any kind of construction was going on. It was also really helpful that so many brands had come out with such accessible and easy canned beans. These were cheap, required no effort to cook, and the result was something you could use in a soup, a sandwich, or a casserole. It just depended on what you were feeling that day. Either way, you were going to get a delicious meal. One of the biggest reasons I think this was as popular as it was is because people really began to rely on it during the Great Depression. Another good reason is that this was the perfect lunch for your kids, and it was so low effort that making it wasn't a hassle at all. Olive loaf on rye was your mom's attempt at sophistication, whether you asked for it or not. It looked like bologna, until you noticed the green pimento-stuffed olives embedded like some kind of edible mosaic. The meat was pink, the olives were green, and the whole sandwich smelled like a deli had gotten lost in a thrift store. Rye bread made it even fancier, with its dense texture and sharp tang. But kids did not care about fancy. They cared about not getting laughed at, and bringing olive loaf to school was social suicide. Still, it had its defenders. Kids who genuinely liked the odd mix of salty meat and briny olives. Maybe they were ahead of their time. Maybe they just had weird taste buds. Either way, they stood by it. You could find olive loaf in plastic lunchboxes next to Capri Suns and string cheese. It held its own in a world of peanut butter and jelly. It was bold. It was unapologetic. And most of all, it was forgotten. Today, even deli counters hesitate to carry it. But back then, it was a declaration. My mom shops at the nice grocery store. Corned beef salad sandwiches are a creamy and savory blend of deli-style corned beef. They typically come mixed with your usual suspects. A little bit of mayonnaise here, some mustard there, and if you really want to be extra, some chopped pickles. These get served between sandwich bread in specific, but if you don't have that, any normal white bread will also do. So these actually have a tangier taste than you would think. And to combat that, a lot of people would also use the honey mustard sauce as a substitute for mayonnaise or even pair it up with the mayonnaise. Some versions would also throw in scrambled eggs or shredded lettuce for a better texture that plays with the corned beef itself. This is something that was extremely popular in America during the middle of the 20th century, especially after World War II ended. People were trying to bounce back from the effects of it all, and canned meats really helped save some bucks. It's something you started seeing not just at work, but at school lunches, picnics, and even potlucks, and this was doubly true for the Midwest and different parts of the South. Bean sandwiches were one of the most important staples for people living not just in the 20th century, but for people all over America for thousands of years. So many of the beans we've become so accustomed to were literally the lifeblood of several communities for a long time. Pinto beans, navy beans, kidney beans, black eye beans, these may be things that we just occasionally use in a salad nowadays, but for a lot of people, having these was the difference between meeting your budget for the month and having to get a loan from somewhere. You could make bean sandwiches with a minimal amount of beans, and they were able to provide some much-needed nutrition and protein in people's diets that they otherwise wouldn't be getting. Some people were not even able to afford the awful cuts of meat or the very cheap ones that butchers would typically discard. They would save whatever meat they had for weekends, celebrations, or for when they really couldn't tolerate eating a makeshift bare-bones meal anymore. Bean sandwiches, thus, were really good at sustaining families, and they were the food of choice for people who had labor-intensive, physically demanding jobs back then, such as factorymen. Green tomato pie is something that'll have you running back for seconds. First off, you gotta hand it to whoever made this dish for their ingenuity. It's not every day you get a banger of a dish that actually is centered around making the green tomato shine out of everything else. But Southern home cooking will do that for you. Charlotte's green tomato pie in particular makes use of some typical Southern spices like cinnamon and nutmeg and unripened green tomatoes, and has you making a pie that'll rival even the best apple ones you could find at bakeries. Green tomatoes have an especially great harvest during the fall, so that's when this dish would see the most mileage. You would find houses all over the South constantly making green tomato pies. And this specific pie is an example of how you don't need anything fancy to create something that can get everyone at the table. You know what's even funnier? This dish is one of the best things to come out of mock cooking because it was made to imitate mock apple pie and mincemeat pies. An imitation of an imitation ends up giving us something that was a big part of Southern culture. Who would have thought? Chili beans and crushed crackers were just another meal from the never-ending nightmare that was the 1930s. But this one's just a bit more special than the rest. Maybe it's the one that got away in the entire history of food in the States. Maybe it's just how it became a staple of the culture later on, but this one always stood out. Chili beans and crackers were more than just a way to fill up for the evening. They were sometimes all you had. It wouldn't be so irregular to come back home from work, the most grueling shift of the week now safely behind you, and immediately be greeted by a bowl of chili beans and crushed crackers. The Dust Bowl wasn't just a time when people's wallets ran dry, it was also a time when their fields did too. It was very common for crops to fail, and families would often just live off of the tiny bits they could salvage. Basically, chili beans were the only recourse left to people in times like that. The last line of defense, you could say. It wasn't expensive, it filled you up, and it tasted just a bit more normal than everything else. You could say it was probably one of the few things people were eating that actually even had any taste anymore. You could get the entire thing in about 15 cents, and it would make you a lot happier. Guess that's why people look back on it with so much sentimentality. What do you think? Any comforting memories you can stir up and associate with a bowl of chili beans? The list would be incomplete without mentioning America's beloved lunch sandwiches. Grinders from Connecticut were popular in the 1970s as a go-to-lunch for many corporate workers during their breaks. Popping up at local diners and delis, Grinders was a long sandwich filled with deli meats, cheese, and vegetables. Going back to hearty lunch meals, pot roast is a family lunch that was made in homes using whichever ingredient was available at the time. Historically, pot roast can be traced back to Europe, where peasants and working-class homes regularly ate this lunch. Made using tougher cuts of meat and commonly available vegetables, America adopted this recipe as their own during the Great Depression. Economic perils allowed for pot roast to be a part of lunch tables, as people would use just about any vegetables and protein they could find. The most popular recipe was slow-cooked beef with carrots and potatoes topped with gravy. With the economic situation in the States improving, pot roast lost significant popularity amongst consumers as necessity was no longer something they had to factor into their cooking. Sloppy Joes have been a staple in American school cafeterias since their introduction in the mid-20th century. This dish features ground beef or pork that is sautéed with onions and garlic until browned, then simmered in a savory tomato-based sauce seasoned with Worcestershire sauce and other spices. The thick, hearty mixture is then spooned onto soft hamburger buns, creating a filling and flavorful sandwich that is both messy and delightful to eat. The preparation requires minimal kitchen equipment and ingredients that are staples in most school pantries, making it a cost-effective choice for feeding a large number of students. Moreover, the ability to prepare the meat mixture ahead of time and quickly assemble the sandwiches during busy lunch periods enhances its practicality. The familiarity of the flavors, combined with the satisfying nature of the sandwich, ensures that Sloppy Joes remain a cherished option within school meal programs. Number 21. The Sloppy Joe Sandwich. The recipe ran in the 1988 USDA quantity cookbook on a single page. 25 pounds of ground beef, 4 cans of tomato sauce, brown sugar, vinegar, mustard, onion, and Worcestershire. The mixture simmered in a tilt skillet for 40 minutes, then went into a hotel pan with a pair of long-handled scoops. A kindergartner got 1 scoop on a hamburger bun. A 6th grader got 2. The bun soaked through by the time your tray reached the table, and the only way to eat it was with a fork. Many older Americans still call it a manwich, like the Hunt's brand on the home shelf. The sodium count on a single Sloppy Joe ran past 900 milligrams, which the 2012 standards capped well below. Canned salmon patties transformed affordable pantry protein into crispy, satisfying lunch fare that seniors could prepare in small batches. A single can of pink salmon, costing roughly 30 cents, provided enough fish for several patties when mixed with crushed crackers, egg, and minced onion. The mixture was shaped into rounds and fried in oil until golden brown on both sides. For seniors living alone, salmon patties offered the advantage of being made fresh in whatever quantity was needed, since the canned fish kept indefinitely. 2 patties served between bread or alongside vegetables made a complete lunch, providing protein and satisfaction. The recipe required no precise measurements and forgave substitutions, making it accessible for those who rarely cooked elaborate meals. Many seniors learned to make these patties during the Depression and carried the habit into retirement. The soft bones in canned salmon provided valuable calcium. Though canned salmon still fills shelves, the art of patty making has largely disappeared. Sorghum syrup sandwiches were sugar for the poor and fuel for the strong. A thick smear of dark syrup between 2 biscuits or slices of white bread turned into instant energy for men working fields or hauling timber. Sorghum grew easy in southern soil, and the syrup mills were the heart of many small towns come harvest season. The sandwich itself was sticky and simple, sweetness caught between starch, just messy enough to make it real. It was the kind of food children would sneak before chores, and grown folks would pack for long days when they needed something to push them through. Sorghum was more than a sweetener. It was survival in a jar, and it stayed good for months. The taste was rich, earthy, and honest, a little bitter around the edges, just like life itself. Continuing the sandwich trend onto Delaware, the locals created a unique recipe called crab cake sandwiches. People instantly adopted the sandwich as a favorable lunch to eat in work breaks. Delaware crabs recipes often get overlooked because Maryland and Chesapeake Bay are more famous in terms of seafood. Quick skillet tamale pie was the shortcut lunch that showed up in nearly every old cookbook under hearty fast meals. You browned some ground beef, poured in canned chili, sprinkled crushed corn chips over the top, and finished it off with shredded cheese. It was fast, filling, and about as close to homemade comfort food as you could get when groceries were scarce and the clock was ticking. Moms loved it because the ingredients were cheap, and kids devoured it because it was spicy, cheesy, and crunchy all at once. Some folks tossed on sour cream or salsa to dress it up, but most families stuck with the basics when money was tight. It was not authentic tamale pie, but nobody cared. It hit the spot, fed the family, and came together in under 10 minutes. You could find this recipe scribbled in old notepads, passed down from neighbors, or tucked into faded cookbooks that promised fast, filling lunches for busy days. Hoppin' John is a dish that has some pretty rich heritage. I'm talking about African, Caribbean, and Native American roots that all boil together in the melting pot known as the South, where it first started becoming really trendy. However, the origins of the dish are actually a bit darker than just a happy coincidence that somehow got into everyone's table. Though the people who were eating it happily wouldn't know, it was first created and brought over by enslaved Africans in the American South. It made use of African rice and pork, and yes, the best part of the dish were the black-eyed peas even in those times. Now, as far as the name Hoppin' John is considered, nobody really ever knew where it first came from, or if there was a John who made this dish and brought it into everyone's lives, but the first time this name was mentioned was in the 1840s in a print. If you were down in the South and African American communities during New Year, then you would especially see a lot of Hoppin' Johns everywhere. The aroma of those peas and the smoked pork wouldn't miss anyone's nose, as the scent carried for miles and miles away. It was eaten specifically on New Year's because it was a common belief that eating Hoppin' Johns would bring good luck to people if they ate it to start the year. If you went into any new year with such a good plate of food, I'd say your luck was already pretty good. So maybe it does work? Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches were what happened when your parents wanted to show off a little. Elvis Presley supposedly ate them by the dozen, which gave them some sort of mythical cool factor. But even without the king's endorsement, they were the kind of lunch that made you feel like royalty. Greasy, sticky royalty. The peanut butter glued everything together, while the bacon gave it that crunch you could hear 2 tables over. Sweet, salty, and absolutely heart-stopping. Literally. This was not diet food. This was your mom was feeling generous food. Served on white bread, maybe toasted if she had time, it was the sandwich version of getting away with something. You were not supposed to eat bacon for lunch. You were definitely not supposed to drown it in peanut butter. And yet, there it was, crammed into a sandwich bag and sweating by noon. By the time lunch rolled around, the bacon was soggy, the peanut butter had oozed out the sides, and it was still somehow perfect. Nobody makes them anymore. Maybe that is for the best. But once upon a time, it was the king of brown bag lunches. Let's talk pork pies for a hot second. Basically, these were the original British meat snacks, and a lot of immigrants that first came on over to America popularized this dish as a working-class old reliable that you could whip up whenever you wanted. A classic pork pie is this round pastry jam-packed with ground pork, tucked into a firm and crumbly hot water crust. The top is usually sealed, and you have a layer of pork jelly poured in after baking, which sets as soon as the meat begins to cool. I know that might sound like a bit much, but it really does work. Also, the peppery seasonings aren't something you can miss here. They really make the dish stand out, and the cold, dense pork center contrasts amazingly well with the buttery crust. It's something that people preferred eating cold because that's when everything would truly set in, and the jelly would be at its best. But you could have it hot too. Pork pies are genuinely a vintage recipe though, going back all the way to medieval England. They took off in the 16th century. They were a massive hit with fox hunters, and the only ones that could hunt those were upper-class dudes in red coats. Eventually, it became a no-nonsense meal that everybody knew about. Or milk toast was a common meal for many working-class and poor Americans. This was doubly true if you were living in the 19th and 20th centuries. I mean, like bean sandwiches, This is something that I feel was always just popular, but it was never really massively used like it was in these 2 centuries. It was very easy to digest, it was something that filled you up, and it was a great way to repurpose any stale bread you had. The appeal of milk toast was pretty good in that regard. You got a filling, sweet dessert out of it, and you also got to take care of any bread that was about to go bad. For low-income families, milk toast was a good way to stretch very limited resources. Stale bread works just fine with warm milk, and in rural areas where families had their own cattle and cows or access to fresh dairy at wholesale prices, it was even more of a thing. I know for a fact you've all grown up on some of your grandparents' baked ziti, especially if you have some Italian roots, and if you do, then you share that in common with this dish. Right from the streets of Italy, immigrants first brought this dish over in the middle of the 19th century throughout the early start of the 20th one, so it had a lot of time to become something that people could love and associate with the finer things in life. People had a lot of time by the mid-20th century to try this dish, and plenty of families had passed their own secret baked ziti recipes down. The baked ziti really hit its highest highs during that time period in the 1950s to the 1970s, and it was something you could enjoy at both a potluck and a fancy at-home date. It was a staple of Italian-American cooking, and you could even find it at weddings. I, for one, think that really speaks to how popular the dish was, but what's your experience with this dish? And if you don't have any yet, is it something you'd ever try out? So people had some different ways of incorporating split pea soup and bread into their diets during the Depression. One of the most common ways to do it was to have the split pea soup just be a one-pot meal. Why did this work? Well, to save you a long story detailing why cooking it in one pot works, it was most usually prepared that way. Plus, the broth it would simmer in would work really well as a side. Season that with just some basic things like salt and pepper, and you have yourself a pretty full meal. The next thing to do was to crumble the bread into the soup and then pretty much just use it to thicken the soup. Sometimes people did this because otherwise the soup in question was just a little too runny and thin. How could it be anything else? You might be thinking of the typical, conventional soups we're used to, but this was literally just beans and water. Then still, there were people who used the bread as a topping, and they'd dip pieces of the bread, scoop up the peas, and make a bite out of it. It was switching things up in little ways like this that helped people keep their sanity intact through the back-to-back madness that was the 1930s. Onto the Cuban sandwich, which first appeared in Florida and rose in ranks as a favorite lunch food. You could say the sandwich literally came from Cuba, as in the 1900s, Ybor City in Florida witnessed a huge influx of Cuban immigrants. They brought along Cuban sandwiches with them and started selling them in the state. Taste-wise, the sandwich was outwardly, so it is really no surprise people welcomed this lunch onto their lunch tables. When Spam was stocked up on the shelves of grocery stores, Americans used it to create their favorite lunch, a Spam sandwich. Spam, spicy and ham nicknamed thus, was sold as canned processed meat in markets where it found unprecedented success due to the great taste and cheap price tag. Eating processed meat on its own, however, was not as appealing as creating a sandwich was, and hence Spam sandwich was invented. People would either fry or grill Spam and sandwich it between bread with various condiments to ensure the lunch would not taste dry. Immediately, the masses took a liking to the cheap lunch. Just about anyone could cook up a Spam sandwich and please their stomachs during lunchtime. The sandwich remained popular until Spam started developing a bad reputation for having twice the amount of recommended fats for a healthy diet. This caused people to steer away from the processed meat. Macaroni and cheese loaf emerged as a popular variation in the 1970s when schools sought to diversify their menu offerings while still providing comforting and familiar foods. This dish takes the beloved elements of traditional macaroni and cheese, a mixture of cooked macaroni and creamy cheese sauce, and adds eggs and breadcrumbs to bind the ingredients into a solid loaf that can be easily sliced. The loaf is baked until the exterior is slightly crispy and golden, offering a textural contrast to the soft, cheesy interior. This format not only makes serving more efficient, but also reduces food waste, as the loaf can be cut into precise portions. Number 20. Chicken pot pie. The crust was a sheet of pie dough laid flat across a deep hotel pan, and your filling was a thick stew of diced white meat, peas, carrots, and a roux made from chicken fat and flour. The whole pan baked for 45 minutes until the crust browned in patches. A square spatula cut servings the size of a paperback book. Steam came up off the gravy when your crust broke open. Cafeteria pot pie was one of the few items that crossed every American region with the same recipe, like a weather map drawn in pastry, because the USDA distributed surplus chicken to schools under the same commodity program from 1955 onward. The pies stopped appearing on most lines after 2012 because the crust carried too much saturated fat. Districts replaced them with chicken stew over a whole grain biscuit. Potted meat and crackers provided quick, shelf-stable lunch protein for seniors who needed no-fuss meals ready in moments. Those small cans of spreadable meat paste, often pork or chicken-based, cost mere pennies and required no refrigeration until opened. The meat spread easily on saltines, rye crisps, or Melba toast, creating bite-sized portions that could be eaten while reading or listening to the radio. For seniors living alone, this lunch represented pure convenience since crackers stayed fresh in sleeves and meat cans stacked neatly in pantries. The flavor was salty and intensely meaty, a little going far when spread thinly across crackers. Some added pickle slices or mustard to brighten the richness, though many ate the combination plain. The protein helped maintain energy through afternoon hours when larger meals felt burdensome. This wasn't glamorous eating, but it was practical sustenance, acknowledging the reality of cooking for one. Though still sold in stores, potted meat has disappeared from respectable lunch fare. Fried green tomato sandwiches were tart, crisp, and practical, born out of the need to use what the frost might ruin. Unripe tomatoes were sliced, dredged in cornmeal, and fried in bacon grease until golden. Layered between bread, they made a meal that traveled well and tasted like summer's last stand. Field hands loved them for the crunch, while homemakers loved that nothing from the garden went to waste. They were bright and sharp, the kind of food that woke your tongue after hours in the heat. Some folks added onions or a slice of cheese, but most ate them plain, still warm and oily in paper wrapping. It was a clever dish, built from what could not wait for tomorrow, carrying that same stubborn spirit that kept rural families going year after year. Pineapple and cheese salad cups were the weird little lunch that somehow ended up in almost every community cookbook back in the day. You grabbed a can of pineapple rings, scooped cottage cheese right in the center, sprinkled on shredded cheddar, and if you were really fancy, served the whole thing on a lettuce leaf. It looked impressive in those black and white church bulletins, but really, this was all about making canned food stretch into something that passed for lunch. Canned pineapple was cheap, cottage cheese was always chilling in the fridge, and cheddar somehow found its way into everything. It sounds wild now, but people loved the mix. Sweet, salty, creamy, and a little crunchy if you added walnuts or celery. Moms tossed these together for luncheons, potlucks, or the days when cooking felt like too much work. It was fast, weirdly filling, and cost next to nothing. You could find this recipe clipped to refrigerator doors or tucked into those old spiral-bound cookbooks every kitchen drawer seemed to have. It never made the cover of fancy food magazines, but it kept showing up where it mattered, on busy lunch tables when time was short. For families with little more than pantry staples, stretching a meal was an art form. Tomato gravy. Over rice was a perfect example of how a handful of cheap ingredients could be turned into something warm, filling, and, on the right day, even delicious. Rice was affordable, easy to store, and could be cooked in large batches, making it a go-to base for struggling households. The tomato gravy itself was a simple mix of canned or fresh tomatoes, flour for thickening, and a little fat, usually bacon grease or lard, to give it depth. Some versions were smooth, others chunky, depending on what was on hand. When money was especially tight, even just tomato juice and water could create a thinner, more soup-like version. This dish had roots in the South, where tomato gravy was often served over biscuits. But during the Depression, rice became a common substitute since it was cheaper and stretched further. Leftovers weren't wasted either. Extra gravy could be poured over cornbread or mixed into the next day's meal. It was proof that a little creativity could turn a sparse pantry into a meal that still felt like home. Vienna sausages and saltines were not a meal. They were a dare. Tiny pink tubes floating in mystery juice, packed into a can that hissed when you opened it, like it knew it was about to be judged. You would drain them, maybe pat them dry, and line them up like little soldiers on a stack of saltines. No heat, no fuss, just raw, salty commitment. The crackers softened under the weight of the sausages, sometimes crumbling entirely. But you powered through because this was your lunch, and if you were lucky, there was mustard. Not fancy mustard. Yellow squeeze bottle stuff that cut through the meat-flavored monotony. It was not gourmet, it was survival. A lunch built for kids who knew how to eat without complaining. And maybe, just maybe, you started to like it. Maybe the weirdness became comforting, like knowing you could always count on something so unapologetically odd to be waiting in your lunchbox. Kids today would never touch them. But back then, they were a rite of passage. Beef dripping toast is pretty much entirely nostalgic comfort food. Let me run you by a typical dripping-based toast. You take some thick slices of crusty bread, which ideally should be warm or toasted, but will work with whatever the day gives us. You slather on some beef drippings and some salt, pepper, malt vinegar, and whatever else you really like on your toast, and you're good to go. Beef drippings are just the rendered fat from roasts, and most of the time they still have the little browned jelly bits mixed in with the toast. As far as flavors go, you want to imagine a deep umami with a real buttery richness. Something that hits like a cozy blanket on a cold day. It's almost as if toast and your regular 20th century Sunday roast had an incredibly greasy baby meant for breakfasts. Beef dripping toast wasn't just popular in America with the working class. It was the same deal in Britain, and it was served for, honestly, any meal of the day. Dirty cheap, really filling, and something that takes about 15 minutes to prepare? Yeah, nobody was going to be letting go of this recipe anytime soon. Onion sandwiches are not really hard to understand. They're simple, inexpensive meals that were common among many poor Americans. Plus, there's no secret here. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's just raw onion sliced into thin shapes placed between two slices of bread. At most, people would add in whatever butter, salt, or pepper they could spare, and it was something that was favored by people who really wanted an easy-to-prepare meal. Onions also had the benefit of being some of the cheapest vegetables available in the entire market. They also were great for storage, which means that they were able to be bought in bulk without you worrying about them going bad. Bread was also something that people always had in stock, and many families would be relying on meals like this to get by. If they could not afford to buy their own bread, a lot of people would make their own bread or purchase day-old loaves at a discounted price. Onions weren't ever something expensive, but people could also grow them, and many who lived on the outskirts of urban cities and communities did this. They were also a common crop even within these communities because people had their own home gardens. Despite the simplicity, though, the onion sandwich was a knockout. It could really fill you up. The meals we've had so far are really cheap, make-do food, but they still are a proper meal. The sandwiches never lost their hold on America as the Italian beef sandwich started showing up on menus in the 1970s in Illinois. The sandwich was a mix of thinly sliced roast beef with au jus and giardiniera served on an Italian roll. Sounds fancy, right? Well, that is exactly how locals in Illinois thought. Now here's something that started out in the bleakest of times but quickly became a sensation throughout America even after the Great Depression ended. You can't ever beat a fried bologna sandwich. I don't care what uptown neighborhood and what fancy restaurant you've been to. Something about that mix of bologna with cheese, mayo, and sometimes even bacon and sausages is unbeatable. It was something that was incredibly beloved by the public right after the Second World War ended, and the Midwest in particular couldn't really ever get enough of it. Diners, homes, rural areas, local breakfast joints, everyone was serving an affordable fried bologna sandwich. It was something you could rely on to both satisfy your taste buds, get you a healthy dose of protein, and not break your wallet if you had it daily, which was really asking for a lot in those times. So, you might be surprised to hear this one, but people actually got enough turnip stew and dumplings to make a meal out of it. You might be thinking dumplings sound pretty expensive for a time when the wins themselves were stacked against your bank account. But hear me out. Dumplings were actually insanely economical, and loads of Americans had begun to make real efforts to learn how to make some good ones. Dumplings used flour, water, fat, and some baking powder. All of this basically costs around 5 to 10 cents individually, minus the fat and water. Since people usually wouldn't have fat to work with, they'd use lard. People were making dumplings at home and mixing them up with stews, broths, and just about everything else they worked with. Now, turnips, on the other hand, those were the actual tricky things to get. It's exactly because they were easy to cultivate and one of the few things that actually worked with the climate of the Great Plains that people were so quick to ravage the stores for them. As a side effect of that, most people simply resorted to growing them in their gardens, because at least you'd know for a fact you'd wake up to some turnips. Georgia's lunch special in the 1970s was the pimento cheese sandwich. Simply put, it was a sandwich filled with a creamy, tangy pimento cheese spread created using shredded cheese, mayo, and diced red pimentos. Pimento cheese was especially famous in Georgia because there was a surge in commercial advertisements of the spread in the state. Continuing the trend of sandwiches, we bet you have never heard of a grilled peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Recognized to be a sandwich that emerged as a twist on the classic peanut butter and jelly, this is just one of the many variations of sweet lunches famous in America. Staying true to the name, you grilled your regular peanut butter and jelly sandwich to produce a warm, melted, and gooey sandwich. You cannot really go wrong with peanut butter and jelly as your main condiments, so the new version of this old sandwich gained popularity throughout many states. Coming across a grilled peanut butter and jelly sandwich nowadays is a rarity, as the sandwich's popularity decreased as a lunch item. This is due to how time-consuming grilling the sandwich was. Fish sticks became part of the school lunch menu shortly after their commercial introduction in the 1950s. Made from white fish like cod or pollock, these sticks are cut into manageable pieces, breaded, and then deep-fried or baked to create a crispy exterior with a tender and flaky interior. This preparation method not only makes fish sticks easy to eat, but also appealing to the palates of young students, who may otherwise be reluctant to consume fish. The breading, often seasoned with spices and herbs, adds a savory flavor that complements the mild taste of the fish, making it a popular choice in school cafeterias. Fish sticks are typically served with tartar sauce or ketchup and a side of vegetables, providing a balanced meal with proteins, carbs, and vitamins. Their ease of preparation, including the ability to cook them from frozen, aligns well with the needs of large-scale meal production typical in schools. Number 19. Rectangle cheese pizza. A frozen sheet of par-baked dough, 14 inches by 20, came stacked 12 to a case from a regional supplier. The kitchen ladled tomato sauce from a tilt skillet, spread it with the back of a serving spoon, then covered the whole sheet with 1.5 pounds of low-moisture mozzarella from a 5-pound bag. 8 minutes at 500 degrees, then the cook pulled the pan and cut it into 24 perfect rectangles with a long-handled wheel cutter. Each rectangle weighed about 4 ounces. In 1987, the line cost added up to 65 cents per serving, like a coin you could trade across the lunchroom. That was the cheapest hot entree the federal program allowed. The crust was thicker than a takeout pizza, almost focaccia, with a thin glaze of oil on the bottom from the parchment. The cheese cooled into a single rubbery layer that you could lift in one piece and eat folded over. Friday was rectangle pizza day in most American districts. Kids who hated the spinach side and pushed the orange wedge to one corner would still finish your rectangle pizza in 3 bites and ask whether seconds were left in the warming line. Lunch ladies learned to count the rectangles by the 3rd class through because the 8th grade boys came through last and would eat anything still warm. The recipe came from a 1988 USDA standardized cookbook distributed to school food service directors across all 50 states. Sister Mary Catherine, in a Cleveland parochial school, used the same recipe word for word, only doubled. The 2012 nutrition standards changed all of it. The dough now must be whole grain rich, the cheese must be reduced fat, the sodium per serving must come in under 480 milligrams. The original rectangle pizza carries closer to 700 milligrams in a single piece. What most people forget is that the cheese formula itself changed too, not just the crust. A modern version exists, made with cauliflower flour and reduced sodium cheese. But the texture and the smell are not the same. A child from 1986 would not recognize the slice on your tray. Vienna sausages and crackers served as the self-contained lunch that required no cooking, no refrigeration, and no cleanup beyond disposing of the can. Those small, soft sausages packed in briny liquid provided ready-to-eat protein that seniors living alone could access whenever hunger struck. A can cost roughly 15 cents and contained enough sausages to pair with crackers for a complete, if modest, midday meal. The sausages had a mild flavor and tender texture that some found comforting while others tolerated as practical sustenance. Eaten straight from the can with crackers, this lunch could be assembled in under 10 minutes without dirtying pots or pans. For elderly folks on fixed incomes, Vienna sausages represented protein that lasted indefinitely and required nothing beyond opening the can. Some included mustard for dipping, but many ate them plain. The lunch carried associations with simple times when elaborate preparation seemed unnecessary. Vienna sausages have largely disappeared from consideration as proper lunch fare. Potato cakes from leftover mash were the quiet heroes of mountain kitchens. You mixed yesterday's mashed potatoes with flour, salt, and maybe an egg if you had one, then fried them in lard until the edges turned crisp. They were soft inside and golden outside, wrapped in cloth to stay warm for the noontime break. Whether eaten with onions or just plain, they were the kind of food that filled the stomach and felt familiar. They started as supper leftovers but became a comfort in their own right, passed from hand to hand in lunch tins and brown paper. Nothing fancy, just good sense and good flavor. Every family had their way of making them, but they all shared the same goal, stretching a meal into tomorrow. Stepping aside from sandwiches, states like Hawaii preferred heartier meals like a plate lunch. Plate lunches were typically a meal consisting of rice, macaroni salad, and a meat entree. Customers would get several meat options like teriyaki chicken or kalua pork. It was somewhat akin to modern-day Chinese takeout, but localized for Hawaii. Spam and pickle sandwiches were one of those salty, tangy lunches you could whip together before the coffee even finished brewing. You sliced up spam, fried it in a pan, stacked it on soft white bread, and layered pickles over the top, done in under 10 minutes. It was not the prettiest meal, but it was fast, filling, and made with stuff most families already had sitting in the pantry. Spam was practically a food group during the lean years, and those jars of pickles stretched on forever, making this one of the quickest cheap lunches around. Some folks added mustard, lettuce, or even a slice of cheese if they had it, but most just kept it plain. Back then, nobody cared about gourmet ingredients or trendy recipes. Lunch was about survival, and a hot spam sandwich hit the spot when the cupboards were running bare. You would find this recipe scribbled on index cards, stuck in old cookbooks, or just passed along by word of mouth. It might sound like an oddball now, but back then, spam and pickles were a lunchroom classic that got families through tight days. Loved that. So, squash might not be our top pick on a regular day, but Grandma's squash casserole was so irresistible that we found ourselves going back for seconds, or even thirds. This casserole was a staple in Southern cuisine and was Graham's favorite way of sneaking nutrients into our dinner. Squash is rich in vitamins A and C, potassium and fiber, making it a wholesome choice. Now, this dish was typically famous in the summer when squash was available in abundance, but you could freeze the veggie and enjoy it all year round too. Squash casserole was highly customizable, meaning Graham could tweak it by adding cooked bacon, sausage, or even fresh herbs. The secret ingredient that gave this bad boy its unique taste was a dash of hot sauce, so next time you attempt making this dish for a potluck, don't forget the key ingredient. Thank me later! American chop suey in a Tupperware bowl was the culinary equivalent of a shrug. Pasta, ground beef, tomato sauce, and whatever else your mom had lying around. It was not pretty, but it filled you up. The noodles were usually elbows, the meat was always overcooked, and the sauce was probably from a jar. Still, it had heart. It had the kind of comfort only a plastic lid could seal in. You would open it at lunch, and the steam would hit your face like a warm blanket that smelled like oregano. Some kids wrinkled their noses, others traded a fruit roll-up for a few bites. It was the kind of lunch that got better the longer it sat. Something about the way the noodles soaked up the sauce made it taste like home. And if it was cold, even better. You could fork it straight from the fridge and feel like a rebel. It was not Chinese, it was not Italian, it was just American. And it worked. Pickled egg and bread is one of those old-school snacks that kind of raises an eyebrow when you first hear about it, but once you try it, you actually end up firmly seated on the bandwagon. It's exactly what the description on the tin says too. It's a pickled egg, usually drowning in vinegar and different kinds of tangy complementary spices, with a slice of plain buttered bread or a soft roll. No fancy layering, no Worcestershire sauce or anything, just the classic sharp punch of a pickle, balanced by the familiar, comforting tastes of egg and bread. Flavor-wise, this is a full-on vibe. The egg has a really nice texture that goes wonderfully with the pickles, and the acidic kick from the pickled brine really helps to contrast with the richness of the yolk of the egg. You take that, mix in some warm buttered bread, and you get yourself a meal that's the whole package. Creamy, soft, chewy, sharp, tangy, and whatever other flavor profile you can guess in your head. Pickled eggs are actually something that you'd find in New England more than anywhere else in America, but they've always been something of a working-class classic. Hardtack and water is not really something you can say this about. Hardtack and water was literally something people only ate in the worst of times when they had absolutely nothing else to work with. A simple cracker-like biscuit made of flour and water was one of the most common foods in America for around 2 entire centuries. It saw so many different eras, events, and wars. People associated it with famine, regular inflation spikes, Civil War rationing, the Depression, and so much more. Seafaring traders would keep a steady stock of hardtack, and it was actually even more important for them. This is because next to cockroaches, diamonds, and titanium, hardtack might be the most indestructible thing on the planet. When the thing is stored properly, it literally can stay good for years without spoiling, and this is something that you'd usually expect of food that's been put through preservatives. Plus, the economical benefit was unmatched. With just some flour, water, and salt, hardtack was one of the easiest things to make at home. Also, one of the most boring things. Speaking of those times, another really good source of protein was catfish, and one of the best ways to have it was fried catfish with hush puppies. This is again something that'll take us right to the heart of Southern cooking if we eat it. Along those rural places near rivers, lakes, ponds, and other bodies of water where you could find fresh catfish in abundance. Hush puppies were something made with fried cornmeal batter and were a popular dish to give to soldiers during the Civil War, so all in all, this dish was really light money-wise. Some basic Cajun spices or a Southern spice blend would make it even better into a real full-fledged meal that you could eat in comfort with the family. While it's been a big part of Southern cooking ever since the 19th century, it arguably had its biggest glory days in the 20th one as part of Southern soul food. There was a time in the 30s to 40s where soul food started to get into more and more menus across several places in the South, which wasn't always the case. Thank God it did, though, because steamed catfish definitely doesn't hit the spot quite like fried ones do with some golden brown hush puppies. So the techniques that people picked up with dumplings helped them out in other areas too, namely, making homemade bread. You'd pair that up with lard spread and onion slices, and you'd pretty much be eating as good as someone could be during the bowl and the Depression. What a time, though, at least in retrospect. You have one of the worst economic crashes in documented history paired with Mother Nature having an equally historical fit. It's really no wonder that circumstances like that awoke the baker and home chef in a lot of people, probably just out of practicality. Anyway, back to homemade bread. So for this, all you'd need is flour. Most people were using all-purpose flour since it was cheaper to work with. Water, yeast, and salt were the rest of the gang. If you couldn't get your hands on some yeast, sourdough starter would work well too. Honestly, one of the hardest things to get was just the sugar needed for the brain, since granulated sugar was getting pretty hard to come by. Next, the lard spread. So during this time, people really started adopting the mentality of not wasting anything, not even a single part of the animal. That definitely meant all the lard too, which people would hold on to exactly for days like this. On its own, it doesn't exactly inspire an appetite though, but with some onion slices? You've had worse. Indiana took fancy to another level with their breaded pork tenderloin sandwich. Basically, the sandwich was a large piece of pork tenderloin that was breaded, then fried and served up on a bun. Created by a restaurateur named Nick Feinstein, he took the idea of veal sandwiches and replaced it with pork. The sandwich found great success in Indiana, achieving legendary status in the state. Canned food was seemingly a fan favorite back in the day, as SpaghettiOs are the next forgotten lunch we want to bring back. Campbell Soup Company took notice of the popularity pasta was gaining as a lunch food in the 1960s and invented SpaghettiOs. Sold for cheap in supermarkets, the dish was a basic tomato sauce with circular pasta rings instead of spaghetti noodles. SpaghettiOs were convenient and budget-friendly. Thus, they rapidly became a lunch staple for many people who needed a quick meal. Parents preferred giving their children SpaghettiOs because they were less messy, and children enjoyed the circular shape. Eventually, SpaghettiOs became a forgotten lunch as newer, easy-to-make lunches, like Kraft macaroni and spaghetti came along. People simply did not enjoy the taste of canned spaghetti and moved on from the iconic SpaghettiOs. Creamed corn is prepared by cooking sweet corn kernels until tender and then mixing them with a creamy sauce made from milk, butter, and a thickener such as flour or cornstarch. Seasoned lightly, usually with salt and pepper, and sometimes enhanced with sugar to bring out the natural sweetness of the corn, creamed corn is a favorite in school cafeterias for its smooth, slightly sweet flavor profile that appeals to young eaters. This dish serves as an excellent way to incorporate vegetables into students' diets in a form that is generally more palatable to children who may be picky eaters. Its popularity in schools is reinforced by its nutritional content, offering a good source of fiber and vitamins while being gentle on young stomachs. Creamed corn's ability to be kept warm in serving trays without losing texture or flavor makes it particularly suited to the cafeteria setting, where dishes need to remain appealing throughout the serving period. Number 18. The corn dog on a stick. They came frozen, 80 to a case, the cornmeal batter already wrapped tight around a beef and pork frankfurter on a wooden skewer. The cafeteria oven baked them on parchment for 18 minutes. Then a kitchen worker tonged them onto trays 2 at a time. Mustard came in foil packets you tore open with your teeth. The wooden stick was the part most kids fought over after the dog was gone, because you could prop it in a milk carton and pretend it was a flag. Corn Dog Day was usually a Wednesday on the 4-week rotation, paired with baked beans and a peach half. The cafeteria version was always oven-baked, like a leaner cousin to keep the saturated fat under the federal cap. By 2014, the breading tested above the new sodium limits. Most districts pulled it from your menu and never put it back. Open-faced cheese dreams turned simple ingredients into something that felt special enough to serve on real plates with proper attention. The preparation began with buttered bread topped with sliced cheese, then placed under the broiler until the cheese bubbled and turned golden brown at the edges. This wasn't merely cheese toast, but a composed dish that seniors living alone could make feel like an event worth sitting down to enjoy. The broiling transformed ordinary American or cheddar into something almost sophisticated, with crispy edges and molten centers that satisfied deeply. Some cooks added tomato slices beneath the cheese, variations that stretched a simple concept into infinite possibilities. For those cooking alone, Cheese Dreams offered portion control, since each slice of bread represented a deliberate serving. The ingredients cost mere pennies and required no special shopping, making this lunch accessible any day. Though the name has faded from vocabulary, broiled cheese on toast remains comfort food at its purest. Cornmeal mush squares were proof that mountain folks could turn the simplest ingredients into comfort. Cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt were cooked into a thick porridge at night, poured into a pan, and left to cool until firm. By morning, it's sliced clean, ready to be fried in bacon grease until crisp and golden on the outside. The inside stayed soft and creamy, making it a meal that worked hot or cold, plain or with a drizzle of syrup. It was food that didn't spoil fast, didn't cost much, and didn't need anything fancy to taste right. Even when cupboards were bare, there was always cornmeal to rely on. Its smell filled the kitchen like a promise, warm and earthy, steady as the sunrise. Every bite carried the comfort of routine and the pride of making something from almost nothing. In the mountains, that was enough to keep spirits strong. Egg salad with sweet pickle relish was the batch-made lunch that carried families through hot summers, last-minute picnics, and quick work breaks. You boiled up some eggs, peeled them, chopped them, mixed in mayo, sweet pickle relish, a little salt and pepper, and scooped the whole thing onto soft sandwich bread or rolls. It was creamy, tangy, and came together fast, especially if the eggs were boiled ahead of time. Old cookbooks loved this one because it was practical, frugal, and ready in under 10 minutes if you planned right. It filled up hungry bellies when grocery money was tight, and kids happily took it to school tucked in wax paper wraps. Some folks dressed it up with celery or paprika, but the sweet pickle relish was the real shortcut, adding just enough kick to brighten up plain eggs and mayo. You would find this recipe in faded lunchbox guides, community cookbooks, or scribbled on note cards in kitchen drawers. It might not win awards today, but back then, it was one of those quick, comforting lunches that kept families fed when every dollar counted. Creamed peas on toast were a very simple and inexpensive meal that helped many people get through the day in the 1960s, especially throughout rural America. Peas were man's best friend because of how abundant they were. You could also throw them on top of anything for a better crunch and flavor, or you could just make breakfast meals out of them like this. The 1960s were seen as a transitional period for the culinary world in America. Processed convenience foods were slowly starting to dominate, but working-class homes were going to feel the change later than others. They were still relying on home-cooked meals that had been passed down from family to family. That's pretty much how it would work in a lot of rural areas. People would find out a great idea, record it, pass it down to their kids. Sometimes that would be ways to farm or maintain the home, and other times it would be how to have a breakfast that saves you money. A can of peas cost just a few cents, and it did the job better than anything else if you didn't have beans on hand, so why not? I mean, it's a lot better than just toast. Braunschweiger sandwiches were the dark horse of childhood lunches. Wrapped in wax paper and made with a spreadable meat that looked like wet clay, they were both feared and weirdly respected. Braunschweiger, for those who did not know, was liver sausage, soft, salty, and undeniably pungent. It spread like butter and smelled like your grandpa's hat closet. But it had a following, a small, loyal following. Kids who grew up in German households or with parents who loved real food swore by it. Served on rye bread, with mustard or onions if your parents were brave, it was the kind of lunch that made your classmates take a step back. You did not trade this sandwich. You defended it. You ate it with confidence. Or you tried to. The taste was overwhelming, but it stuck with you, literally and figuratively. No one could ever spell it, but everyone remembered it. It was the kind of lunch that made you grow up a little faster, and maybe, just maybe, miss it a little when it was gone. The miner's pasty is something with an incredibly serious backstory. It's this handheld meat and potato pie that gets wrapped in a crumpled pastry. Usually the pastries were pretty thick too, and a host of ingredients on the inside. I'm talking diced beef, potatoes, Swede rutabaga, caramelized or just sliced onions, and a generous sprinkle of salt and pepper. This meal was designed to survive a few rounds in hell because it was made so that it would last you the entire day. The target audience for the meal was laborers and people who worked physically intensive jobs, but they wanted to make the kind of thing that these sorts of workers could still carry around in their bags or pockets. The flavor is also something that really helps restore your spunk for the next shift. It's earthy, homey, and rich, the kind of thing that really feels like a home-cooked meal as soon as you bite into it. Miners' pasties were the go-to lunch for a lot of different kinds of miners everywhere, not to be confused with the Cornish tin pasties we just talked about. Miners would typically rely exclusively on these because these things were built for the rough life. No plates, spoons, or forks are needed, only your hands and how fast you can finish these and clock back in at work. Spam and crackers are a classic that you are all very aware of. But what you might not know is that after the Depression and war ended, these were the lifelines of people across the entire country. I know we've all heard so many stories of how Spam was nearly invaluable during the Depression, but it's also been something that's worth all of its weight in gold in later eras too. For a lot of people, Spam and crackers were the most ideal and reliable breakfast, something that became steeped and ingrained in their daily routine to the point that they just did not know what to do without it. Do you have anything like that? Maybe a bowl of oatmeal you need to get your day started. A favorite cereal that you just can't get out of bed without. Maybe you really need your usual peanut butter and jam sandwich. Whatever makes you tick, everyone was sustained by Spam and crackers. You could make casseroles out of sandwiches, use it in stews, and even make gravies out of it. You could dip crackers into a makeshift dip at home and also enjoy them that way. Spread some lard on them with the Spam, or make a very nice sandwich with the crackers, Spam and celery or iceberg. It would be low effort and really quick, so it was the perfect thing to make for when you were in a rush. Another cheap lunch item on this list is the Louisiana Po' Boy sandwich. Po', short for poor boy, was a sandwich typically filled with fried shrimp, oysters, or roast beef, and was served on French bread. Speaking of seafood, how could we forget the iconic lobster rolls from Maine? Fresh lobster meat served on a split top roll with a light butter and parsley dressing was a dream lunch for people in Maine. This heavenly creation was a fan favorite in Maine, where the cheapest seafood options before lobster roll was tinned fish. We're going to go forward in time a bit, all the way to the beginning of what most people consider the late 20th century, where stuffed zucchini boats first started becoming something you would hear about regularly. At bars, from your friends and colleagues, or your partners. They became really hot in the 60s and 70s when it felt like everyday people were trying another dish from a new country that hadn't really touched base in America yet. It was the first time people expanded their taste buds beyond the bacon, pancake, and hash brown breakfasts they were mostly used to. Plus, stuffed zucchini boats were really healthy. They were a lot better to eat than those aforementioned breakfasts. The best part was that you could really change up the fillings. So depending on what you wanted, you could have fully vegetarian zucchini boats or ones with ground beef stuffings. People say this is a part of Italian-American cooking, but a lot of Mediterranean cooking makes use of dishes similar to zucchini boats, like using stuffed peppers and vegetables like eggplants. So casseroles were definitely out of the question for most people. Yet a substitute that could fit into the picture was vegetable and noodle casseroles. Noodles were easy to make from scratch, and most people would even buy them in bulk because they hadn't suffered the worst of price hikes. That was reserved for things like good and common cuts of meat, which is part of why you'd never see your average, everyday casseroles on the table anymore. The best part of this dish was in two strengths that made it pretty much ideal for the Dust Bowl, though. Vegetable casseroles could be made with just about anything that people were growing in their victory gardens. Onions, olives, lettuces, and cabbages. If it's green and comes from the ground, you can put it in this casserole. Next, noodles were a filling thing to put in there too, because it kept your appetite down. Fiber, Same reason gym bros are always telling you to eat oatmeal in the morning. It's like nature's Ozempic. The second strength this dish had was that it was really something you could make in bulk. I mean, once people got to making this, they could make it for more than just their family. Do you know how big of a deal that is? To actually have more than you need in a time like the 1930s? People saw the advantages to dishes like these and started making them for the entire community, often sharing ingredients and vegetables. It was actually pretty wholesome, if only it weren't in one of the worst times of the 20th century. The barbecue craze in Kansas peaked in the 1970s, so it is no wonder that they preferred the barbecue brisket sandwich. Sliced barbecue brisket served on a bun with sauce had every local in Kansas asking for more, even after their lunch breaks were over. The barbecue sauce in the sandwich was a real crowd pleaser as it completed the sandwich and made the taste delectable. Corned beef hash with eggs was popularized in the States after World War II when rationing meat was a common practice. One of state's biggest food processing companies, the Hormel Company, claims they bought corned beef hash to America in the 1950s and jump-started the invention of corned beef hash recipes. Since acquiring fresh meat was getting harder in the post-war era, people used corned beef to create a hash lunch. The recipe was simple. All you had to do was dice corned beef, mix it with potatoes and onions, then add a poached or fried egg on top. Corned beef was not really a fan favorite, as the peculiar taste did not appeal to many people. This meant that as soon as necessity was not driving people's cooking, they forgot all about corned beef hash with eggs. Bread pudding offers a creative solution for utilizing leftover bread in school cafeterias, turning potential waste into a delectable dessert. This dish is typically prepared by cubing stale bread and soaking it in a mixture made from milk, eggs, sugar, and vanilla, which infuses it with rich flavors and a soft texture. Often, additions like raisins or cinnamon are mixed in to enhance the taste and appeal of the pudding. Bread pudding is then baked until the top layer caramelizes into a golden crust, contrasting beautifully with the creamy custard-like interior. This dessert is particularly popular in schools due to its economical benefits and the comfort it provides to students. The warm, sweet nature of bread pudding makes it a welcomed treat, encouraging students to partake in school meals while providing them with a source of energy. Number 17. Spaghetti with meat sauce. The pasta came in 20-pound bags of dry strands, boiled in a 30-gallon kettle until a piece thrown at the wall stuck for 1 second and slid off. Kids who walked past the kitchen at 10 in the morning could smell the simmering tomato and oregano halfway down your hallway. The sauce was ground beef, canned tomato puree, garlic powder, oregano, and a pinch of sugar. A wire scoop fished portions of pasta out of the kettle, like a net pulling shells from surf, and a 6-ounce ladle dropped sauce on top. The serving line moved fast on spaghetti day. Kids with braces dreaded it and ate the garlic bread first. Sister Joan, in a Pittsburgh Catholic school, served the same plate every Tuesday for 19 years, with a sprinkle of dried parsley, because she said it made the sauce look fresher. The 2012 standards limited white pasta to 1 serving a week per child, and the recipe disappeared from most menus. Peanut butter on crackers served as the no-nonsense lunch that required absolutely nothing beyond opening a jar and a sleeve of saltines. For seniors living alone, this combination provided protein, fat, and carbohydrates in a form needing no refrigeration, no cooking, and no cleanup beyond wiping a knife. The peanut butter's richness satisfied hunger in ways that plain crackers never could, while the salt enhanced the nutty sweetness. A jar of peanut butter cost roughly 40 cents and lasted weeks, making it one of the most economical protein sources available. The crackers stayed fresh in their wax paper sleeves, ready whenever appetite struck. This wasn't a meal that impressed anyone, but it kept energy levels stable through afternoon hours. Many seniors ate this combination while reading or watching television, appreciating that it could be consumed without sitting at a table. Though simple to the point of seeming inadequate, peanut butter on crackers sustained countless quiet lunchtimes. Hoe cake cornbread was humble food with the weight of generations behind it. Mixed from cornmeal, salt, and water, it was poured thin into a skillet or, long ago, onto the flat of a hoe blade held over an open fire. It crisped at the edges and stayed tender in the middle, strong enough to hold beans, greens, or slices of salt pork. Each cake was both meal and utensil, eaten with calloused fingers and quiet gratitude. Hoe cake cornbread carried the flavor of smoke and history, of families who worked from dawn to dark and gave thanks for even the smallest blessings. It was simple food, but never small in meaning, a recipe that traveled through generations, feeding hearts as much as stomachs. Fried chicken is not the only iconic food Kentucky is known for, as the hot brown also originates from Kentucky. Originally created by Fred Schmidt, a chef at Brown Hotel in Louisville, the hot brown is an open-faced turkey sandwich topped with bacon, tomatoes, and Mornay sauce. Cold macaroni ring mold with tuna was the kind of no-cook lunch you either loved or never wanted to see again, but back in the day, it was everywhere. You cooked elbow macaroni ahead of time, chilled it, then mixed in canned tuna, mayo, and peas, pouring the whole thing into a gelatin mold. After a quick trip to the fridge, It came out shaped like a perfect ring, ready for slicing. It sounds a little strange, but in church luncheons, potlucks, and quick summer meals, this was considered fancy and practical. Moms loved it because there was no cooking when the house was already boiling hot, and the ingredients were cheap pantry staples. The gelatin molds made it look like more effort went into lunch than actually did. You sliced off a wedge, maybe threw a little lettuce or parsley on the plate, and that was it. Lunch was ready, cold, filling, and good enough to impress the neighbors. It might not win over modern taste buds, but back then, this molded tuna salad was the fast-track ticket to a retro lunch that felt special when time was short. Handmade butter used to be a really simple kitchen staple at home, and it started to be reborn as a gourmet product when people really got into the crafts and works aspect of it. See, people like things they made on their own. It gives them a chance to show off on Instagram, it gives them something to talk about with their friends, or it just becomes something cool to speak about on a date. You know, a cute and quirky little fact about yourself that helps break the ice. Besides that, there's also the authenticity and uniqueness of a completely 100% homegrown and homemade product. In a world full of preservatives, food dyes, artificial flavorings, and added vitamins and minerals, something that's actually just made out of the stuff God put on earth and nothing else is a relief. The revival of artisanal butter throughout the 2000s to today was really helpful in giving it a new image. High-end restaurants started serving cultured butters, and they even started putting hand-churned ones up for sale. There was a premium price you had to pay, but man, the suburban moms fell for it so bad. Creamed chipped beef on toast, also known as stuff on a shingle, was a meal built in the trenches that somehow ended up in American cafeterias. It started in the military, a way to stretch dried beef into something resembling sustenance. The beef was salty, thin, and usually shredded beyond recognition. The sauce? A thick white gravy made from flour, milk, and determination. It was poured generously over toast, biscuits, or anything else that could act as a sponge. In school lunches, it arrived in lukewarm plastic trays, never quite hot, never quite cold. Kids either loved it or dreaded it. There was no in-between. It was filling, fast, and had that unmistakable cafeteria smell that followed you into math class. Some parents made it at home, calling it comfort food. Others never touched it again after leaving the service. But for a generation of kids, it was just lunch. A strange, salty, beige experience that somehow stuck around long enough to be missed. Spam fritters are also pretty much exactly what you think aren't. They sound like a cutesy dish your wife whips up for you before you come home. But this is actually a wartime dish through and through. Thick slices of canned Spam dipped in batter and then deep fried until they're gloriously golden, pure fish and chip style. The outside is as crunchy and hot as you would expect, and the inside is tender, slightly salty and addictively chewy in the way only Spam can be. The flavor is literally just comfort food. It's slightly smoky, the perfect amount of meaty without being overwhelming, and it balances out with the salty notes. This is a dish that makes no apologies and instead chooses to embrace its greasy nature to give you a taste of nostalgia wherever you are. Spam fritters were something that exploded in popularity during World War II, and meat rationing was still a massive thing. Spam, courtesy of American Lend-Lease supplies, started to become what people were relying on because of how easy it was to work with. It was the working-class answer to the age-old question of, how do we make canned meat something that feels like a proper meal? And Spam fritters stuck around even after the war, too, especially in towns where factory work was a lot more common than any other kind of job. Hey, you might not be fighting a war anymore, but that 9 to 5 is still no joke. Grits and butter were a foundational meal for a lot of different kinds of poor families, but this was particularly true for anybody living in the South. This was even more true for black sharecroppers and tenant farmers. Working-class white families survived most of the 19th and 20th centuries off of foods like this too, but it really cemented itself as a staple of the black community back then. Corn was one of the most widely grown crops in the South, and grits, which were just ground hominy and cornmeal, were a very nice byproduct. Plus, back then, people lived and died by the waste absolutely nothing mentality. They would not let any byproduct go to waste because why should they? It was something they could get in bulk for literally a few pennies. Plus, just like rice and potatoes, grits provided an incredible amount of stamina and energy. Laborers often were also poor and did not have the money to really buy elaborate rations or pick and choose their nutrition, so starchy, fibrous foods were their best friends. Hoppin' John is a dish that has some pretty rich heritage. I'm talking about African, Caribbean, and Native American roots that all boil together in the melting pot known as the South, where it first started becoming really trendy. However, the origins of the dish are actually a bit darker than just a happy coincidence that somehow got into everyone's table. Though the people who were eating it happily wouldn't know, it was first created and brought over by enslaved Africans in the American South. It made use of African rice and pork, and yes, the best part of the dish were the black-eyed peas even in those times. Now, as far as the name Hoppin' John is considered, nobody really ever knew where it first came from, or if there was a John who made this dish and brought it into everyone's lives. But the first time this name was mentioned was in the 1840s in a print. If you were down in the South and African American communities during New Year, then you would especially see a lot of Hoppin' Johns everywhere. The aroma of those peas and the smoked pork wouldn't miss anyone's nose, as the scent carried for miles and miles away. It was eaten specifically on New Year's because it was a common belief that eating Hoppin' Johns would bring good luck to people if they ate it to start the year. If you went into any new year with such a good plate of food, I'd say your luck was already pretty good. So maybe it does work? Cornmeal mush with gravy was one of the best things families living in the Great Plains could hope for. The gravy wasn't just something they threw in for the sake of it, to fill themselves up. It actually added a lot and made the cornmeal significantly better. It really brought out the flavor that was already there, and getting your money's worth was never really an issue with this dish. Cornmeal was something that was so regional that a lot of families just ended up growing up on it exclusively. It was pretty hard to get an affordable meal for yourself back then, but things like this made it just a bit easier to manage. You could even buy cornmeal from your local stores for barely a few cents a pound. So that made it even easier for people living in urban areas and hubs to get it. One of the best advantages of cornmeal was that you didn't have to have an oven or a stove to make something of it. You could just as easily do it over an open fire too. This mush, for example, was something most people made without any kind of kitchen appliances. Fried sandwiches were not the only ones getting hyped up in the 70s. Iowa preferred the loose meat sandwich as a staple lunch food. Much like the famous Sloppy Joe's, loose meat sandwich was made using seasoned ground beef that was served between a set of buns. The sandwich was a little dry because there was no sauce, but the cheap price tag made up for it. Talking about rationed food, porcupine meatballs were a casserole dish that rose to fame during the Great Depression. Trust Americans to come up with creative recipes when times are rough, because porcupine meatballs appear to be tasty and interesting to look at. Made with ground beef shaped into meatballs mixed with rice and simmered in tomato sauce, the dish is named porcupine because the rice protrudes from the meatballs when cooked, resembling the quills of the animal. The use of basic ingredients like ground beef, long-grain rice, canned tomato soup, and onions made the dish cheap. With economic situations improving, people forgot about the woes of the Great Depression, which is one of the reasons why porcupine meatballs are a forgotten lunch today. Creamed spinach in school cafeterias combines nutritional value with palatable presentation, making it a favored vegetable dish among students. The preparation starts with fresh or frozen spinach, which is thoroughly washed and then cooked down until it wilts. A creamy sauce made from a blend of milk, flour, and butter is prepared separately, seasoned with a hint of nutmeg or garlic to enrich the flavor profile. The spinach is then incorporated into the sauce, which gently coats the leaves, creating a smooth and appealing texture. This dish not only adds a vibrant color to the plate, but also increases the intake of greens in students' diets, providing essential nutrients like iron, vitamin A, and calcium. The combination of creamy texture and mild flavors often helps to introduce and encourage a preference for vegetables among younger children, supporting school nutrition programs in their goal to foster healthier eating habits. Number 16. Chicken nuggets with dipping sauce. They came in 5-pound bags of frozen breaded white meat, 28 nuggets per pound, baked on parchment-lined sheet pans for 12 minutes at 450 degrees. Your dipping sauce was barbecue or honey mustard from a half-gallon jug, portioned into 1-ounce paper soufflé cups. 5 nuggets per tray for elementary, 7 for middle school. Chicken Nugget Day was the most predictable attendance day on the cafeteria calendar because almost no kid stayed home or brought a sack lunch that morning. The dinosaur-shaped version most adults remember today did not appear in school cafeterias until 1993. Through the 1980s, the nuggets were always the same uniform oval, slightly puffed at the seam, like a leaf folded once where the breading press closed. The 2012 sodium and saturated fat rules forced manufacturers to reformulate the breading. The crunch is softer and the salt is missing. Canned corned beef hash transformed from breakfast fare into a satisfying lunch when seniors needed something hot and filling without elaborate preparation. The can contained pre-mixed corned beef and potatoes that fried up crispy in a skillet with minimal attention, creating a meal that tasted far more substantial than its modest cost suggested. For those living alone, one can provide enough hash for a generous serving with perhaps some left for tomorrow. The preparation required only opening the can, scooping contents into a hot skillet, and pressing down until a golden crust formed. Some added a fried egg on top, though many ate it plain with ketchup. The salty, meaty flavor satisfied cravings for something savory and warm, especially on cold days. Canned hash kept indefinitely in pantries, ready whenever the mood struck. At roughly 35 cents per can, it represented remarkable value for protein and carbohydrates. This humble canned product sustained generations who understood that convenience and economy could coexist. Poke salad and egg sandwiches were spring's first gift after a long winter's wait. When pokeweed shoots pushed through thawed soil, foragers gathered them young before bitterness set in. The leaves were boiled 3 times to wash away poison, then chopped, drained, and fried in bacon grease until dark and rich. Layered with slices of hard-boiled egg between bread, it became a hearty field lunch, fresh, filling, and full of life. The greens gave a wild tang that spoke of earth and rain, while the eggs brought comfort and weight. It was food born from patience and care, a reward for knowing the land well enough to take only what it offered. In the mountains, such meals weren't poor. They were proof that nature always paid back in flavor and grace. Cheese dreams were the open-faced, melty sandwiches that turned plain old white bread into lunch in under 10 minutes. You laid out a slice of bread, topped it with American cheese, and stuck it under the broiler until bubbly and browned. If you had extras lying around, you could throw on a tomato slice or a strip of bacon, but most folks kept it simple. Cheese dreams popped up in every old-school cookbook as a lifesaver for hungry kids, rushed workdays or weekends when grocery shopping had not happened yet. It was one of those lunches that made the most of cheap pantry basics, but still felt warm and filling. The cheese bubbled up golden and gooey, the edges of the bread crisped up just enough, and lunch was done before you even had time to set the table. Families loved it because it tasted good, cost next to nothing, and required zero effort. It was one of those old-fashioned meals that looked like a shortcut but stuck around because it simply worked when time and money were both tight. If there's one sandwich you can never go wrong with, it's the old-fashioned grilled cheese sandwich. This one is the epitome of comfort food, and Grandma's version was a childhood favorite. Even the pickiest eaters used to beg for this one. So this one became popular during the Great Depression era, when we had to make do with 3 of the most common ingredients in our pantries: bread, cheese, and butter. Now, some of us used to get creative with our grilled cheese by adding extras like sliced tomatoes, ham, bacon, or even pickles. But this one was best enjoyed simple and plain. Oh, and let's not forget, it tastes even better when paired with a warm bowl of tomato soup. Before burgers and fries, grilled cheese and tomato soup used to be the ultimate food combo of our dreams. The best part? Most cheese sandwiches are vegetarian and can easily be made vegan by adjusting the type of cheese and oil. Kugel was not just peanut butter. It was an experiment in how far food companies could stretch the idea of flavored spread before people revolted. Banana kugel, chocolate kugel, even cinnamon. It came in a jar just like peanut butter, but the label had this psychedelic flair that practically screamed, "I was made in the 1970s." Your sandwich was suddenly a dessert, and not always in a good way. Some kids loved it, others could not stomach it. But if your mom packed you a kugel sandwich, you knew one thing for sure: you were not eating anything normal today. It stuck to the roof of your mouth like drywall paste and smelled like a bakery that had lost its identity. Nobody knew what to pair it with, so people got creative. White bread was the usual suspect, maybe with some jelly if you were brave. It was part sugar rush, part lunch, and part science fair gone wrong. And then, just as quickly as it arrived, it vanished. Like a fever dream with a screw-on lid. Now, it is a ghost of school lunches past, one that gets weirder the more you try to remember it. Stew in a thermos is really a classic. This is something that combines a lot of different things to make a unique meal that you wouldn't think of on your own. A thermos is something you usually use for drinks. It doesn't always have to be water, but stew's in there? Not really anyone's first thought. For those who need a warm meal right on the go, though, this was the most reliable thing in the world, especially when you would be working in the winter. Thick and tender chunks of meat mixed in with roto vegetables like carrots and potatoes and simmered in a rich and flavorful broth that gets thickened up even more with some flour and cornstarch. I mean, what's not to like? The flavor oozes out of that thermos as soon as you open it is next level. Stew in a thermos was a game changer for workers during the 50s and 60s. It didn't matter what your job was, whether you were a truck driver, worked a night shift in a factory, or ran numbers behind a desk. Even kids in school would take it along with them. The thermos lets you pack a hearty and warm meal that could pretty much survive hours inside the bottle without losing its essence. You had to have some trial and error here first, though, because most people would often make the stew too liquidy on their first try or two, and it would end up spilling over once you unscrewed the lid. Thermos-steeped stew became something of a regional favorite in northern areas where the temperature was really known to drop, and I think it's a cute little dish we could bring back today too. Sugar bread was an inexpensive meal that a lot of poor Americans, especially children, ate when there was nothing else they had. It was something that was literally just as bare bones as you could imagine. Plain bread, sprinkled with only a modest amount of sugar, spread with butter and dipped in a little bit of milk. It was a way to stretch ingredients, but people tried their best to make it feel like it was a sweet treat regardless. Of course, it was hard to take it that way, but it really shows you how resilient people were and how ingenious their plans were when it came to rationing things out. Bread was really cheap and filling, and it was especially one of the best things people who were farmsteaders relied on. Plus, sugar was also just as important for people who lived in the city. It was a quick burst of energy that really set people right, and while it was not cheap, a small amount could do a lot for a plain slice of bread. Also, that crunch was just addictive. You didn't need to cook it, and it was a decent pick-me-up for what it was worth. Brown Betties were one of the most classic American desserts to ever grace the table of an American kid. Something that might be seen as an old-fashioned dessert now, but used to be the next best thing after an apple pie. The flavors of a Brown Betty usually come from the spiced apples and other fruit-layered dishes, which are really buttery. The sugary breadcrumbs on top give it a crunch, which really adds to the entire vibe of the Brown Betty. You're looking for a warm, comforting dish that gets you in a nostalgic mood. Something you can sit down with and enjoy bite for bite, not rush through. It's an experience that you want to savor, like an empty, windy street as you walk down by and enjoy it. The Brown Betty was definitely something that would get you up out into the street, whether you were going to visit your grandma's for an authentic pie or a nearby bakery to reminisce about childhood days. The earliest recipes you can find are the ones from 1866, but those are more like Apple Betties than the ones we're talking about. Either way, this dish has definitely evolved alongside the population, and those who grew up with it will remember it fondly. So, making a lot of use out of the stuff you could grow easily was just the way people were living. You already know how convenient of a setup people had with cabbage, so the next stop was incorporating some awesome cabbage-based dishes into the weekly diet plan. Cabbage rolls stuffed with leftover rice were one of the best things to make because you could kill 3 birds with 1 stone. You were eating for 1, and for 2, it was really healthy. Third of all, you would get to use any leftover rice and make sure absolutely nothing went to waste from your pantry. Sounds like someone being neurotic? Well, when the difference between being hungry is whether or not you manage a sack of rice properly, I think it's fairly justified. Now, I gotta say, people really weren't that open to cabbage yet. I mean, as a standalone item. They were used to having it as an embellishment in most dishes, but they didn't have anything that was cabbage-centric. The 1930s wasn't just a decade of struggle and resilience, it was also a decade of broadening horizons. People were acquiring tastes they never had thought they would ever enjoy. Soups were not the only lunches rising in ranks across the states, as Michigan's Coney dog was one of the most iconic lunches in America. Nicknamed Coney dog, this hot dog was a beef frankfurter, wrapped in a steamed bun and topped with savory beef chili, mustard, and onions. You might be familiar with bologna because of its popularity as a deli meat today, but fried bologna sandwiches were in a league of their own back in the 1960s. Categorized as a Southern classic, fried bologna sandwich was brought into the USA by German immigrants. The sandwich was mostly popular as a school lunch, as cafeterias would serve up hot fried bologna slices on bread with cheese to students during lunch hour. While school lunches had a reputation for being average food, the fried bologna sandwich was exempted from such notions. Children loved when fried bologna was on the school cafeteria menu, and parents were happy that their children were finally content with their school lunches. Fried bologna sandwiches remained a popular lunch choice until schools shifted to foods that could be cooked in batches instead of sandwiches that had to be individually assembled. Rice pudding is a classic dessert that finds its way into school menus, beloved for its simplicity and comforting qualities. Made by slowly simmering rice in milk until the grains are tender, this pudding is sweetened with sugar and typically flavored with vanilla, cinnamon, or even a bit of citrus zest to elevate the dish's aroma and taste. The slow cooking process allows the rice to absorb the flavors and the milk to thicken into a rich, creamy texture. Rice pudding can be served either warm or chilled, making it a versatile option for different seasons and preferences. Its gentle, creamy texture and the mild, sweet flavor profile make it an excellent choice for a school dessert, offering a source of carbohydrate and calcium. Number 15. Chicken patty on a bun. The patty was a perfectly round disc of pressed white meat, breaded and frozen, baked on a sheet pan in batches of 40 for 15 minutes. It went on a soft white bun with a leaf of iceberg lettuce and a single slice of pickle. No mayonnaise, no mustard, no condiment unless you asked. The patty was so round and uniform that you sometimes pulled it out of your bun and held it up like a coin. A kid in Tulsa or Tallahassee or Toledo could walk into any school cafeteria in 1987 and find the same chicken patty on the same bun, because all of them came from 3 commodity processors contracted by the USDA. The breading carried too much sodium under the 2012 standards. A whole grain bun replaced the white bun. The new version sits softer in the bun. Bouillon with crackers provided warmth and comfort when appetites were small, but something hot seemed necessary. Those little cubes dissolved in boiling water to create a steaming cup of broth that cost mere pennies, yet delivered genuine satisfaction. For seniors living alone, bouillon represented the simplest possible hot lunch, requiring only a kettle and a mug. The broth's salty warmth felt nourishing, even when solid food held no appeal, making it particularly valuable during illness or on days when energy for cooking didn't exist. Crackers floating in the broth or eaten alongside provided substance, turning liquid into something approaching a meal. Beef and chicken varieties offered options, though many seniors kept both in their pantries. The cubes stored indefinitely and took up almost no space, making them essential emergency provisions. This wasn't lunch that anyone bragged about, but it served its purpose admirably. On cold afternoons, a cup of bouillon brought comfort that belied its simplicity. Vinegar pie slices were a forgotten miracle of thrift, bright, tangy, and sweet all at once. When lemons were scarce and fresh fruit out of reach, mountain cooks made do with vinegar, sugar, and eggs, to create something that tasted every bit as fine. The filling baked into a glossy custard with a soft, buttery crust that held its shape even in the summer heat. It needed no refrigeration, no fancy ingredients, just patience and a steady hand. Wrapped in wax paper or newspaper, slices went into lunch pails beside coffee jars and biscuits. The first bite was sharp and surprising, but by the second, the vinegar's sting mellowed into a warm, caramel-like sweetness. It was a pie that aged gracefully, growing richer over time, a small reward for those who worked hard and wasted nothing. It became a staple of mountain kitchens, a quiet symbol of resourceful living. What began as imitation lemon pie turned into something uniquely its own, humble yet elegant in its simplicity. Vinegar pie proved that flavor could come from imagination, not luxury, and that even in lean years, sweetness could still find its way to the table and make life a little softer. Fried bologna with mustard on toast was the quick stovetop lunch that somehow managed to taste better than it had any right to. You sliced bologna, tossed it in a hot pan, watched it curl up at the edges, and slapped it on toasted bread with a smear of yellow mustard. That was it. Lunch in under 10 minutes. It was salty, tangy, crispy around the edges, and showed up everywhere from lunch counters to kitchen tables when the grocery list was running short. Bologna was cheap, lasted forever in the fridge, and frying it gave it just enough of a glow-up to make it feel like more than sandwich meat. Some folks added a slice of cheese or swapped in rye bread, but the classic stayed simple and fast. Fried bologna with mustard was not glamorous, but it hit the spot when you needed something filling, salty, and satisfying without much effort. It was a staple in school lunchrooms, factory break rooms, and busy homes, sticking around because it was affordable, reliable, and always ready when the clock was ticking. Peanut butter and pickle sandwiches present a surprising mix of flavors that demonstrates the adventurous side of American sandwich making. Originating in the mid-20th century, this combination pairs the creamy, slightly sweet taste of peanut butter with the sharp, crunchy tang of pickles. Often referred to as the Southern Comfort Sandwich in the southern United States, it features a liberal spread of peanut butter on bread with layers of thinly sliced pickles. This sandwich can be enjoyed open-faced or as a standard sandwich, and it pairs wonderfully with a cold glass of milk. The resulting meal is a bold blend of sweet, salty, and tangy flavors, offering a taste experience that's both unexpected and satisfying. Pickle and cheese roll-ups were the kid version of adult charcuterie, except nobody knew what charcuterie was back then. It was just a dill pickle, wrapped in a slice of processed cheese, maybe stabbed with a toothpick if your mom was feeling fancy. Sometimes ham got involved, sometimes not. Either way, it was salty, slippery, and weirdly satisfying. This was the kind of lunch your mom packed when she was out of bread, but still wanted to say, "I tried." Velveeta was the cheese of choice, because it bent, folded, and clung to the pickle like it had something to prove. You would pull it out at the lunch table and immediately get reactions. Some kids gagged, others begged for a bite. There was no middle ground. It was all crunch and chew and tang, a flavor bomb that somehow felt refreshing and heavy all at once. Keto kids today might think they invented the idea. They did not. We were rolling pickles in cheese before it was cool, and definitely before it was considered healthy. It may have looked like a lazy lunch hack, but back then, it was a declaration of resourcefulness. Cold roast beef sandwiches are the perfect example of how less is sometimes more, and this wasn't just more, it was iconic. You've got some juicy roast beef, slice after slice stacked on top of each other, sandwiched between slightly crusty white bread. It's literally a Scooby-Doo snack. The beef is something seasoned with salt, pepper, and a lot of mustard, or horseradish. It's actually something that packs a pretty substantial kick. Now, sometimes people would add a slice of cheddar or Swiss cheese and throw in some fresh vegetables like lettuce and tomatoes. But the star of this show was always that decadent, juicy roast beef that was just thin enough. It had an incredibly satisfying flavor, and it was something that was really just carried by the natural flavors that were already there. No extra work needed. cold roast beef sandwiches were something that became really common to see in American lunchboxes and deli counters by the early 20th century, especially during and after the wartime era and the Great Depression. It was one of the most economical lunches you could get for yourself, and people really wanted to be spending as little on food as possible, which is pretty different from our mindset today. Cabbage and noodles were one of the most affordable vegetable-based dishes you could get for yourself. The best thing about cabbages were the way they were available year-round, and let me just put things into perspective for you. Back then, the seasonal nature of things was something that was instrumental to how people planned out their budgets, their groceries, and what they were going to be eating that week. You may also think that without refrigeration, noodles wouldn't really be sustainable, but people would simply make the noodles from scratch when they needed it. Hard work, I know, but at least you didn't need a lot of the stuff. A simple head of cabbage, one bag of noodles that was enough to feed a family of up to 4 and 5, and it was an incredibly popular thing in cities. Though there may have been some cultural gaps in preferences. In the South, it never really caught on the same way. It's definitely quite a refreshing dish, though. Are you a big fan of deli food? Deli meats, sandwiches, loaves, that kind of thing? Then one of the best parts of that kind of eating was the olive loaf. It was usually made with pork and beef plus chopped green olives, which is what it became known for. There was a small, brief period before convenience foods started taking over America, where processed meats were really becoming a thing, and this dish was a big part of that time, which arguably spanned all over the 1940s to the 1970s. It had an extremely loyal fan base too, as this was responsible for many deli counters still staying in business. These days, you could find retro stalls that still do a mean olive load, but the days where this was a commonplace item on the street and something you'd see your grandma cooking up are long gone in America's history. People definitely remember the flavors of the bologna, the ham loaves, and all the amazing dips they came with, though. Carrot soup with some amazing, homely crackers made right in the comfort of your kitchen was the ideal breakfast and lunch going around during the dusty apocalypse that plagued the land. It was cheap, it was fresh, and the carrots were super good for you. Carrots were grown a lot in victory gardens, and they were a staple, really. Most people dedicated their cellars to holding carrots because of their ability to last for so many months without any kind of cooling. Didn't have access to refrigeration? It's time to open up that basement, buddy. One other thing that really helped carrots take center stage as one of the most commonly consumed vegetables across the United States. Canned food being introduced during this time was really a generational switch-up from the norms people were used to. Canned carrots were expensive, just a bit more, and it wasn't as convenient as growing them in your own garden, but it was still something. I mean, you could get 0-15s. If you got really lucky during the Depression, you could even put in some meat drippings. Carrots gave a lot of vitamin A too, which a lot of people thought was really necessary back then. Remember what I said about keeping yourself healthy because it avoided doctor's trips? Yeah, that. The catfish po' boy was lesser known across America and more of a Mississippi special. A true working-class lunch, the catfish po' boy sandwich was born during a strike when workers were protesting for rights. During this time, local restaurant owners Benny and Clovis Martin gave out free sandwiches made with fried catfish, lettuce, tomato, and remoulade sauce. Since then, these sandwiches were sold at a cheap price during lunch breaks. Make way for more sandwiches, as sardine sandwiches are next on our list. A fairly easy lunch to cook up, sardine sandwiches used canned sardines that were mashed and mixed with mayonnaise or mustard to create a umami-flavored sandwich spread. Like we previously mentioned, seafood was getting expensive and families needed alternatives like canned fish to survive the lack of seafood options. Home chefs turned towards canned sardines to prepare a delicious sandwich with just a few ingredients that were laying around the house. Surprisingly, the sandwich was well received by the masses, and it became a go-to seafood food that you could cook up during family lunches. Unfortunately, sardine sandwiches suffered the same fate as tuna macaroni and cheese as the prices of fresh fish decreased in the States due to increased fish farming, leading to tinned fish becoming less popular in homes. Peanut butter and jelly bars take the quintessential American sandwich and transform it into a dessert format that is both nostalgic and delicious. This treat is prepared by layering a base of crumbly, buttery dough in a baking dish, spreading a generous amount of peanut butter and then jelly over the base, and topping it with more of the crumbly dough. The bars are then baked until the topping is lightly browned, resulting in a dessert that is rich in flavor and has a satisfying texture contrast between the soft filling and the crunchy topping. These bars incorporate the familiar flavors of peanut butter and jelly in a form that is easy to distribute and consume, making them an excellent addition to school lunch menus. Peanut butter and jelly bars not only provide a source of energy, but also bring a sense of comfort and nostalgia to the dining hall. Number 14. The peanut butter bar with chocolate frosting. The bar was one of the most beautiful objects a 1980s cafeteria ever produced, and every child knew it. The recipe lived on a single index card in the lunch lady's binder. 1 pound of butter, 3 cups of peanut butter, 4 cups of powdered sugar, 6 cups of graham cracker crumbs, all mixed by hand in a stainless bowl the size of a baby bath. The mixture was pressed into a half-sheet pan, half an inch thick, then topped with melted milk chocolate and butter, smoothed flat with the back of a long spatula, and chilled in the walk-in for 2 hours. The lunch lady cut it into 36 perfect rectangles with a knife dipped in hot water between every cut. A single bar weighed nearly 3 ounces and tasted like a Reese's cup pressed into a brick. Kids traded their orange wedges, their carrots, their entire entree for an extra peanut butter bar. A second grader in Akron once kept hers in your lunchbox for 3 days and rationed it in pencil eraser-sized bites because she did not believe she would ever taste anything that good again. The peanut butter bar appeared on the 4-week rotation exactly twice a month, and on the morning the bar was on your menu, attendance in some elementary schools rose by 7%. Older lunch ladies were said to bake an extra pan and tuck it into the warming oven for the teachers, because the teachers traded for them too. The bar had everything a 1980s child wanted in a single object. It was sweet, it was rich, it was salty under the chocolate, and it filled a small hand. And then in 2014, the new federal Smart Snacks rule capped your dessert serving at 200 kilocalories and limited the sugar to 35% of total weight. The peanut butter bar carried 460 kilocalories and well over half its weight in sugar. It was pulled from cafeteria lines in most American districts within 18 months. The recipe survives only in church cookbooks and in PTA fundraisers, and in the memories of the kids who walked past the dessert window in 1986 and saw the chocolate gleaming under the lights like a window in a candy store. Canned pork and beans delivered complete nutrition in a form that seniors living alone could heat and eat within minutes. The beans provided protein and fiber, while the sweet tomato sauce made them palatable without additional seasoning. A single can cost roughly 15 cents and contained enough beans for a satisfying lunch, often with leftovers for the next day. The preparation couldn't have been simpler. Open the can, pour into a saucepan, and heat until bubbling. Some seniors ate them straight from the pan to save washing dishes. The small pieces of pork fat added richness that plain beans lacked, though the quantity was never enough to feel heavy. Served with bread to soak up the sauce, pork and beans became a complete meal that stuck to the ribs through afternoon hours. The cans stacked neatly in pantries and lasted years without spoiling. For generations raised during the Depression, pork and beans represented security. This humble product never pretended to be fancy, but it fed millions who valued reliability. Ham hock and pinto bean pouches were lunches that filled the belly and lasted through the longest days. A single ham hock simmered with a pot of pintos could feed a family for days, the broth thickening into a smoky stew that needed nothing more. Whatever remained after supper was ladled into wax paper pouches or small jars for the next day's work. By noon, the beans had soaked up every ounce of flavor, turning creamy, hearty, and rich. Workers in sawmills, fields, and mines tore open their packets, scooped the contents out with a biscuit, and called it a meal. Salt from the ham kept it savory, the starch from the beans kept it filling, and the slow simmering made it comforting in a way only patience could create. It was food built to last, simple, nourishing, and deeply honest. No one left hungry, and nothing went to waste. Each bite carried the memory of home kitchens and the hum of pots left simmering on wood stoves. It wasn't elegant, but it was strong food, made for strong hands, feeding strength back into the very people who earned it every single day. Cornbread pancakes with applesauce were the sweet, savory shortcut lunch you could pull together when the pantry looked bare, but you still wanted something warm. You grabbed a box of Jiffy cornbread mix, stirred in some water or milk, dropped spoonfuls into a hot skillet, and fried up little golden pancakes. They were crisp around the edges, soft in the center, and ready in minutes. Most folks topped them with a dollop of cold applesauce straight from the jar for that sweet, salty combination everyone quietly loved. It was a weird mix, but it worked, especially when groceries were low and creativity was high. Old-school lunch menus listed these because they were filling, fast, and cheap, making them a favorite for busy parents or frugal school cafeterias. You could dress them up with honey or butter, but the classic stayed simple: cornbread cakes with a scoop of applesauce, ready in 10 minutes flat. It was comfort food that took little effort and brought just enough sweetness to brighten a rough day. In Texas as well as New York, rice with raisins started becoming a really popular dish among the middle class and a breakfast that many children grew up on, especially in Indian American communities, which were sparse at the time, but they were still there every other block or two. It was already customary to eat rice with milk and raisins there, so they brought it to America, and others took note. They were not the only ones to introduce it, though, since Chinese Americans also had their own take on the recipe that led to a more custard-like variant. When people could not afford to even eat rice pudding, they would make their rice and eat it with different kinds of nuts and raisins. The idea spread like wildfire in states like Alabama and Arkansas and the Midwest overall. In Michigan, it was a pretty common choice to use brown sugar and cinnamon whenever available. Tuna noodle casserole leftovers were not made for lunchboxes, they just ended up there. The night before, it was dinner, steaming, bubbly, topped with crushed potato chips or breadcrumbs if your family was fancy. But by lunch the next day, it was cold, compact, and stuffed into a square Tupperware container with a lid that never quite sealed. The smell was unmistakable. One whiff, and everyone in the cafeteria knew what you were working with: tuna, noodles, cream of mushroom soup, maybe some peas, maybe not. It was never pretty, but it filled you up. The noodles fused together into a kind of casserole cake, and you had to hack at it with your plastic fork just to make progress. But somehow, it still tasted like home, like tired parents and scraped-together groceries, and we'll eat this for 2 days straight. You might not have been thrilled to see it in your lunchbox, but you respected it. It was dependable. It was solid, and let us be honest, it was better than a soggy bologna sandwich. The egg and cress sandwich is literally so perfect yet basic that it makes no sense this dish ever faded into the sidelines. Hard-boiled eggs get chopped up and mixed with mayonnaise or butter before they're topped with a generous serving of cress between 2 slices of soft white bread. This is an egg salad if I've ever heard of one, and the creamy richness of it combined with the peppery crest makes for a refreshing, zingy bite that really knocks you into the present moment. Egg and cress sandwiches are something you would consider British, right? Just off of the vibes? You'd be smart to assume that. This sandwich was a really popular choice in the middle of the 20th century, especially because after World War II, rationing might have eased up. But that doesn't mean that meat became widely available overnight. These days, egg and cress sandwiches are just a retro memory, but they used to be the ideal lunch to take to work or school. Pinto beans and cornbread was a lot more than just a simple staple meal that people were relying on to get by. It was something that was essentially just survival. Pinto beans were considered very cheap and nutritious, and they were one of the most affordable sources of protein. They were packed with fiber, calories, and they were really filling. Dried beans were also resistant to being spoiled, and they could be bought in bulk, stored for months, and just be used in a variety of different ways. Pinto beans were also really good because they did not require much cooking equipment for it to work. Cornmeal was something that was widely available, a lot cheaper than your typical wheat flour, and it was something that didn't require any kind of yeast either. You just needed water, salt, and a little bit of pepper. Some pots and a cast iron skillet would work perfectly fine, And the best part was that this would last literally days and days, although the kids definitely had to get used to it. We're going to take a bit of a deep dive into a cuisine that we haven't really explored before. I'm talking about caponata, which is a very traditional Sicilian dish that goes all the way back to the 18th century. It's supposed to be a sailor's dish. Can you believe that? It got that reputation attached to it because the birthplace of caponata was Sicily. There's no specific restaurant or name that's credited with making it, but if you ever went there, you'd know just how much the people appreciate this. The first time this became popular in America was when Mediterranean cuisine and Italian immigrants were mixing together and creating all sorts of new dishes, as well as bringing old familiar ones from their homeland. The best part about this dish for a lot of people was that it gave a chance to a vegetable, which otherwise people just aren't too fond of. I mean, eggplants aren't really the most main course-worthy idea you could think of, right? Pair that up with some tomatoes, onions, olives, and capers and cook it in vinegar, sugar, and olive oil. Make a nice little traditional agrodolce sauce, and you'll get this extremely earthy dish with a lot of complex flavors going for it. Keeping the seafood trend of the 70s going, crab soup from Maryland became quite famous amongst locals this year. Crab used in this soup came straight from Chesapeake Bay, which was a local specialty in Maryland, making the soup an instant hit amongst locals looking for a good lunch that tasted just like home. Our list of forgotten lunches would be incomplete without mentioning bean sandwiches. You may not have even heard of this vegetable-based take on sandwiches, but decades ago, bean sandwiches were part of many lunch tables. Home chefs preferred this healthy take on sandwiches even though cooking beans was a tedious task because you would end up with a flavorful and well-seasoned meal. According to the traditional recipe, the sandwich was cooked beans that were sometimes mashed and served on bread with toppings like vegetables and cheese. Like any other sandwich, the bean sandwich was highly customizable and satisfied just about anyone's cravings. If you had leftover beans from dinner, making a bean sandwich could be your best option. Since people were conscious of leftovers and wanted the most value out of all of their meals, bean sandwiches were a good way to utilize beans. Still, the combination was a little odd, and not a lot of states would pick up this lunch option. As meat delis opened up across the states, bean sandwiches were forgotten to be a thing of the past. American chop suey is a comfort food classic that has found a niche in American school cafeterias, combining practicality with palatability. This dish melds ground beef, elbow macaroni, and a tomato-based sauce seasoned with onions and bell peppers, all simmered together to allow the flavors to fully integrate. The preparation begins with sautéing onions and bell peppers until they are soft, adding the ground beef to brown, and then incorporating the cooked macaroni and tomato sauce. This mixture is seasoned with herbs such as oregano or basil, and sometimes a dash of Worcestershire sauce for deeper flavor complexity. American chop suey is particularly valued in school settings for its ability to be made in large volumes economically, using ingredients that are staples in most school kitchens. It's also well-suited for holding and serving over extended periods, which is essential in a busy cafeteria environment. Number 13. Mashed potatoes with brown gravy. The potatoes came as dehydrated flakes in a 50-pound bag from the USDA commodity program, reconstituted with hot water, butter, and a splash of whole milk in a steam kettle. A wire whip on a long handle blended them in 3 minutes. The brown gravy came from a powdered base, mixed with hot water in a smaller pot. A number 12 scoop dropped a perfect dome of potatoes on each tray like a small white hill, and a 4-ounce ladle covered it with gravy. The gravy ran down the slope and pooled in the corner of your compartment, and you would dip a tater tot in it before the corn even hit the tray. The 2012 standards did not pull mashed potatoes outright, but the powdered gravy disappeared because of the sodium count. The new gravy is thinner and tastes nothing like the version a 1986 kid remembers. Liverwurst on rye carried old-world flavors into American lunchtime, offering rich, spreadable protein that seniors with European roots appreciated. The liver-based spread came in convenient tubes or wrapped logs that kept well in refrigerators for weeks. Spread thickly on dense rye bread, liverwurst created a sandwich with genuine substance and distinctive flavor that stood apart from blander lunch meats. For those living alone, The portion control was natural since you spread only what you needed. The strong, slightly mineral taste paired perfectly with sharp mustard and perhaps a pickle slice, creating complexity from simple components. Many seniors remembered this from childhoods when organ meats were everyday food. The combination of rye bread's earthy chew with liverwurst's creamy richness satisfied in ways that softer breads couldn't match. At roughly 25 cents for a log that made multiple sandwiches, liverwurst represented economical protein. This old-fashioned lunch has largely disappeared from modern tables. Cold-fried apple hand pies were the portable sweetness that turned hard work into something worth savoring. Made from dried apples rehydrated with sugar, cinnamon, and a pinch of nutmeg, the filling was tucked inside thin circles of dough and fried until crisp. Once cooled, they were wrapped in brown paper, stacked neatly in tins, and packed for the next morning's work. By lunchtime, the pastry had softened around the filling, turning chewy and tender without losing its golden flavor. Each bite carried the taste of fall, the comfort of orchards, the scent of dried fruit, and the memory of wood smoke. Families made dozens during apple season, drying fruit on screens so none went to waste through winter. School children unwrapped them eagerly at recess, while farmers or miners found them waiting after hours of labor. Sweet but sturdy, they offered both joy and endurance. No frosting, no fuss, just the kind of dessert that worked as hard as the hands that made it. In every pie was gratitude, proof that simple fruit, a little sugar, and time could make something lasting. 100 lunches, and not one of them came from a cookbook. They came from women standing at counters before dawn, stretching whatever was left on the shelf into something that would hold until dark. If you recognize something your family used to carry to work or to school, tell us about it in the comments. Hit subscribe so the next one finds you, and send this to whoever in your life proved that a little flour, a little lard, and a pair of steady hands were all it took.